Hello, everyone. Welcome to Picture This. If you've been watching the 24-hour subathon, welcome back. If you went and took a 2-minute bathroom break during that enormously long intro, but I will never shorten it because I love it. But this is Chad Webb. Chad, we also saw him earlier, but Chad, how are you doing? Are you ready to talk about 1974 as we continue our Godfather series?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This was a pretty good year. I say there's one movie I didn't really love, but the rest I really dug. So
Cool. Yeah,
you
I
know,
have something to say about the slate as a whole, but I'll wait till our guest comes on to
oh
say my thoughts because I don't think I have a hot take, but I have a very firm statement to say about these 5 films. But speaking of firm statements, we loved him ever since he had his stance on Ordinary People and Raging Bull. We had him back on last month to talk about The Godfather, and we have him on again to talk about The Godfather Part II. It wouldn't be fitting to do one part without the other with this fella. It is Dan Skip Allen. He is back. Let me get rid of that little border there and put you at top so they can see your credentials. Film critic from thefourthrow.com. Dan, welcome back. We're glad to have you on here on the subathon for all these people watching live. How you doing? You excited?
Yeah, when I did this last month, all I could think about is when are we going to do the next one? That is everything I've been thinking. I had these movies watched so fast. I was telling Chad because you guys have been on Gone with the Wind with me, and I said, Chad, dang, Towering Inferno hasn't come in the mail yet. I got it. Finally, it came in the mail. So as soon as I had that movie come in the mail, I was like, damn, I'm watching it because I had all the other ones watched already by that time, So
Yeah.
this is what my whole month besides Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania I've been looking forward to.
Awesome.
nice.
Yeah, and this slate, now that we're all here, I might as well say what the slate is because I always forget to do that off the bat. But the slate for 1974, and get ready, it's a doozy. We got Chinatown, The Conversation, The Godfather Part II, Lenny, and as Dan said, The Towering Inferno. And I'll say my blanket statement right here. Whenever I do watch all these movies, I give letterbox ratings, and a half a star is worth like a point out of 10 for me. So like if it gets 5 stars, it's 10 out of 10, 4 stars, 8 out of 10. And what I do is I put into an Excel doc, I kind of average my totals to just see which years have the highest averages. And after looking through this is tied with 1975, the very next year, as my highest rated year ever.
Wow.
I adore this year of movies. I think any of these movies, I really do think any of these movies could be the number one movie of a given year, depending on the competition. I really do think it's a good slate. So I'm very excited to talk about these movies. And I know, Chad, you just said you're a fan of most of them. And Dan, I'm assuming you're a fan of most of these too?
Yeah, I've seen a few of them quite a bit. One of them I hadn't seen until now. So, but I'm very impressed by some elements of this particular movie, but I'm not going to say anything now because I want to kind of save that stuff for when we get into talking about that movie. So, yeah, a few of them I have seen a lot, and then other ones I hadn't seen as much.
Gotcha. Yeah, and coming off of last month, I was like, oh yeah, that was such a stacked slate. But now watching this, I'm like, this is even better. I just really, I think I have a love for 70s cinema in general, but this one is really strong. But how the show works, we go through the year and talk about the history of the year and why the year was important. Just to kind of give some historical context because it's always important to understand what was going on in the world at the time these movies are made. It really helps influence a lot of the creative decisions that some of these filmmakers are taking. And then we will talk about the ceremony and starting with the cutting room floor of Oscar nomination morning of what doesn't make it. We'll talk about the snubs. We'll talk about some films that we would have maybe nominated as well. Then we'll talk about the ceremony itself, some of the precursors, and then we'll get into talking about each of the movies individually. At the end, we will all pick a best actor and best actress from these 5 movies. Doesn't have to be a nominated actor or actress. It could be. In most of our cases, it probably will be because there were some great nominated actors this year. And then we will tease next month after we compile our number one between the 3 of us, best picture of 1974, which I think is going to be a tough task because there's a lot of good ones. But Chad, you always like to kick things off with giving us a little history, including some births, deaths, and albums of 1974. So why don't you take us into setting the scene of 1974? I know what Dan might be saying when we get to a specific birth that we have to mention. Is that what you're going to say, Dan?
Yes, I was actually.
I read your mind.
Let's do it at the end of the birth section. So, all right, the history of 1974. It was the end of a 5-month oil embargo by most OPEC nations against the US, Japan, and Europe, which had caused the 1973 oil crisis. Democracy was restored in Portugal. Tornadoes terrorized central US, and a violent earthquake terrorizes China. The Dublin and Monaghan bombings are carried out during the Troubles in Ireland. Richard Nixon resigns due to the Watergate scandal. Vice President Gerald Ford is sworn in. The World Tourism Organization is established. The International Energy Agency is founded, and the Rubik's Cube was invented. One of my favorite inventions. So there you go. Births. What? We're good?
I thought that would have been later,
it.
though. It doesn't seem like that Rubik's Cube would have been later, though.
Because it feels like an 80s thing, but I think it was invented in 1974 and maybe popularized in the 80s kind of deal. Births. Kate Moss, Ed Helms, Christian Bale, Olivia Colman, Seth Green of Buffy fame, Elizabeth Banks, Robbie Williams, Jerry O'Connell of Stand By Me and Scream 2 fame, Mahershala Ali, James Blunt, Allison Hannigan of Buffy fame, Edgar Wright, Penelope Cruz, Breckin Meyer, Matt Berry, Fairuza Balk, Sean Gunn, Jewel, Alanis Morissette, Steve-O, Derek Jeter, Joel Edgerton, Catherine Hahn, Hilary Swank, Michael Shannon, Amy Adams, Misha Collins of Supernatural fame, Ray Park, Exhibit, Jimmy Fallon, John Bernthal, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Joaquin Phoenix, Nelly, Ryan Adams, Leonardo DiCaprio, Chad Kroger, Chloe Sevigny, Stephen Merchant, Sarah Paulson, Giovanni Ribisi, Ryan Seacrest, and maybe one more?
Me!
Oh!
Me! I'm 44. I'm 49. Man, there's a lot of 49-year-olds out there.
Yeah.
There's a great football team named after 49ers too. We're glad to celebrate you, Dan, not just as a guest, but also as a birthday representative of the year. Obviously you didn't see any of these in theaters, unless you did. Did you? No.
No.
I was gonna say, I don't know if they even let infants into theaters at that age. Maybe. Especially for these films, probably not.
6 years
I think it would
old,
traumatize. Yeah.
My brain started to realize about movies when I was about 6. 1980. We've already been through this.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yes, we're doing Dan's year this month, and maybe later this year we might do my birth year. All right, deaths. Actually, maybe I didn't finish this one. Bud Abbott of Abbott and Costello fame, Charles Lindbergh, Ed Sullivan, Nick Drake, and Jack Benny. And I have 11 great albums, and I have just 3 on vinyl, actually. We have Court and Spark by Joni Mitchell.
Nice.
We have Diamond Dogs by David Bowie. Oh! And then we have Red by King Crimson. And then we have The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway by Genesis, back when it had Peter Gabriel. On the Beach by Neil Young. Crime of the Century by Supertramp. Rock Bottom by Robert Wyatt. Sheer Heart Attack by Queen. Here Come the Warm Jets by Brian Eno. Queen 2 by Queen. And Kimono My House by Sparks. Check out that great Edgar Wright documentary.
Very good doc.
There you go. So the history of 1974, the stage is set. Keep the Watergate thing in mind, because that's definitely going to come to play in this episode. But yes, looking at the actual ceremony itself, before we get to the ceremony, they have to nominate all the films, and then they announce all the nominations, and there's only 5 that get Best Picture nominations, and there's a laundry list, especially for this year, of films that did not get nominated. So it's time to give our homages to the films that did not make the cut, including what I believe to be some of the genre-defining films of their respective genres. Just at first glance, what I noticed, I mean, some of the most influential horror films came out in 1974, Black Christmas and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. You had great films from up-and-coming filmmakers like Sugarland Express for Steven Spielberg, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. You kind of got the tail end of great filmmakers runs like F for Fake with Orson Welles. And then what I believe to be one of the greatest 1-2 punches of any director in a single year, Mel Brooks giving us Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein the same year. I thought that was incredible. And then also a favorite film of mine being a New Yorker, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. That was my list of like the ones I absolutely had to bring up. But Chad, do you have any other ones to bring up? Any other 1974
Yeah,
films worth
I'll
mentioning?
just read off my list, even if I repeat some.
Hmm.
Here are my notables, and I have two Best Picture worthy, maybe. Ali, Fear Eats the Soul. Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Black Christmas. Foxy Brown. Pam Grier, the great Pam Grier, is in that. Great Expectations. Harry and Tonto. It's Alive. The Longest Yard. Gone in 60 Seconds. The Man with the Golden Gun. The Mask of Zorro. Murder on the Orient Express. Phantom of the Paradise. Scent of a Woman. The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. A Woman Under the Influence. And the two Best Picture worthy, I did pick Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. Mel Brooks is great.
And it's funny because he's not the only director to give us two films in the same year at that caliber, because we will talk about two films from the same director in this slate. Dan, what are some of your favorite movies from 1974 that didn't make the cut? Even if we mentioned them already, I'd love to hear you talk about some.
Yeah, I mean, what a great year! You got two Coppola films, you got a Scorsese film, you got a Spielberg film, you got what's his face? Damn it, now I can't think of it. Mel Brooks has got two films. You know, what a great year for films. I mean, so like you said, I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, a James Bond film in there, and I'd argue maybe one of the films in this slate should have got kicked out for one of those Mel Brooks films. But I mean, hey,
probably agree with you there, Dan. But do we agree on the same one? I don't know.
And
the other thing is, I just got the Kino Lorber of Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. Well, fantastic! First time I ever saw that movie. Very good. I've seen the new one with John Travolta, but that one was really good. I mean, Walter Matthau was fantastic. Just seeing New York and see how the mass transit system works. I'm a big proponent of mass transit system. If you don't know anything about that, Dylan, I'm sure you use the mass transit a lot.
I used it about an hour ago to get here.
I mean, I could go on for hours about that. We don't have time for that. But yeah, a lot of death. Longest Yard with the producer of the first Godfather said, you know what? I don't want to produce the second Godfather. I want to produce this movie about a football player in prison and all this. The Longest Yard. Don't give me that. You're going to learn a lot more about that in The Offer, which you got to watch The Offer, guys. I'm telling you. Death Wish, though. How about Death Wish? Charles Bronson got that in a couple weeks ago. Watch that. I hadn't seen Death Wish in so long, but I'm such a big fan of Charles Bronson, But yeah, what a crazy amount of great films out. Scenes from a Marriage, which they made a miniseries of a couple last year. That's I mean, there's so many amazing films. Yeah. How could they have made it? How did they narrowed it down to 5 that year? That's crazy.
Right. And it's one of those years where I could see 4 of the films we mentioned being in that slate over 4 other films. And I still would have thought it was probably one of the best slates ever. Like it's one of those things where the ones we got were all pretty good. I think I don't know if we're all talking about the same film, but there's like one I might substitute out. But 4 of them I think are very worthy Best Picture nominations. And I'd go as far as to say if 5 of these were your Best Picture nominations, I'd also think those were worthy. So just what a great slate. As for the Oscars themselves, I mean, looking at the 5 Best Picture films, there's not much to say since the PGA and Critics' Choice didn't exist yet. And the BAFTA, they're on their own little wavelength back then. They didn't nominate Conversation, Godfather, Lenny, or Towering Inferno. They only nominated Chinatown, but didn't award it the win. And then Golden Globes, same thing. They didn't really pay much attention to Fosse or the Towering Inferno. Instead, they nominated the other 3, all in drama, and Chinatown ended up winning. But at that point, it was really hard to gauge the Oscar frontrunner based on precursors. But I guess if you had to pick a precursor favorite, I guess Chinatown would be the favorite going into it, though I think a lot of people had their eyes on The Godfather Part II, given the first film's success, and probably thought that was probably the front runner, as it ended up being. And as for the ceremony itself, it's actually not as notable as the last one. I know the last one we had a lot to talk about with Marlon Brando denying his award and all that jazz, but this Oscar ceremony was kind of straightforward. I think the only big news comes from the awards that it was nominated for and won, which is The Godfather Part II. It won twice as many Oscars as the first Godfather won, which was pretty notable considering it was a sequel. And it was the last time ever, still to this day, that they've had 3 actors in a single category up against each other. Nowadays, we see We have 2 Everything Everywhere All at Once ladies. We have 2 Banshees boys. And is there another? No, we almost had 2 Fablemans guys. That was the one I was thinking of in the same category. A few years ago, we had Judas and the Black Messiah, 3 Billboards. Like, we've had double nominees, but triple nominees, this was the last time we ever saw it, with 3 nominations in supporting actor for Godfather Part II. And it's funny because between Francis Ford Coppola and his father, Carmine Coppola, who did the score for Godfather Part II, between the 2 of them, they won 4 awards, which I believe is the most of a single familial duo in the same year to win, even though I don't think familial duos win a lot together anyway. I guess the Coen brothers is the only other one I could think of, familial duo that's been nominated together. And the only last cool fun fact is that this is the only time, or the last time, that a single category had all 5 nominees for films released by the same studio, and that was Best Costume Design. All 5 of the Best Costume Design nominations all came from Paramount. It was Chinatown, Daisy Miller, The Godfather Part II, Murder on the Orient Express, and the winner, The Great Gatsby. Those were the 5 films nominated for Best Costume Design. It is the last time ever that all 5 films of a single studio were up against one another. I think the only other time we could ever see that again is maybe like animated feature, if Disney has all 5. Or like best song, because I really don't think we'll ever see a scenario where all 5 nominees come from the same studio again, unless we continue along the monopolization of one studio just having ownership of all of them. But we'll cross that bridge someday if we ever get there. But without further ado, let's dive into these 5 nominations. Where should we go on the map first? Let's see. Maybe Little Italy. No, let's go west or east a little. You know what? Let's go to Chinatown. Why don't we? Let's go to Chinatown. Chad, tell us about Chinatown.
All right, Chinatown, directed by Roman Polanski, written by Robert Towne, cinematography by John A. Alonso, music by the great Jerry Goldsmith, starring Jack Nicholson, Faye Dunaway, John Hillerman, Perry Lopez, Burt Young, and John Huston. Synopsis: a noir mystery surrounding a drought and a murder.
Ooh. Yes, and thank you for not spoiling too much in that synopsis, because it is one of those films where I feel like it's best to go in as blind as possible, even though I think a lot of people have seen the images and have heard the famous line, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown," but they don't really know what that means until they watch the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, talking about noir, talking about Polanski. Last time we had Dan on, we were talking about a Polanski film, Test, for 1980. So, Dan, you are the guest, so I'm going to turn it over to you first, Dan. What are your thoughts on Chinatown? Is this a first watch, a second watch, a fourth watch? What was this?
This is not a first watch. Are you kidding me? I've watched this a dozen times. I love Chinatown. This movie is so good. I was watching Marlowe the other day, and all I could think about is, I got to go watch The Big Sleep. I mean, I am such a sucker for film noir. And this is one of the best film noirs ever. I mean, I love Jack Nicholson is at the top of his game in there as Jake Geddes. And I'll tell you what, I almost dressed up as Jake Geddes one time, and I put the little bandage on my nose. Because, I mean, if you're going to be Jake Geddes, you got to put the bandage on your nose from Polanski. Hey, whatever. What does he say? Hey, something. He comes up to him and says, "Hey, sweetheart," or like something, honey, or something, and then slices his nose up. I mean, it's like, whoa. You didn't expect that.
Yeah.
Then people are drowned in a reservoir. Then this Faye Dunaway is a femme fatale. I mean, how can you not love Chinatown? The clothes, the cars, and then James Hong. That's the one thing I kind of am annoyed at. But after him talking to Dylan off air about it, it kind of makes sense that they have. James Hong now, then this is 50 years ago almost. So it makes sense if he was a newer actor trying to break in, he plays the help. I mean, I kind of understand it, but that's my only little nitpick with Chinatown. Other than that, is it John Ford or John Huston? John Huston, right? Yeah. John Huston is great in it. I mean, what a great movie. I mean, and water? We're talking about water. This whole thing is it's like crazy, right?
Right. You read the bio, you're like, the California Water Wars. All right, because like if you're in California, like that's like a very big
Yes, it
topic.
is.
That's like
It's a
something
huge
that hits really close to home, but you don't hear a lot of people talking about it other places of the world. And then you're like,
no.
I guess I'll watch this, and you're like, oh, okay, so I get it now. I get why water is a big deal. Chad, is this your first watch of Chinatown?
Yeah, it actually is.
All right, tell us
Or
what was
was.
your experience like?
Yeah, just like noir in general, I haven't seen like a ton. Like I've seen like Maltese Falcon, Double Indemnity. We talked really highly about on this show because we love that movie. So yeah, I'm kind of a burgeoning Dan Skip Allen, big noir fan myself. But I just haven't seen as many as he has. This was a first watch for me, but I was very excited about it because I was like, I know like I kind of know like the what do you call it, the reception of this film, like the
Mhm.
very popular one, like it makes a lot of like best of lists and stuff like that. So, but I didn't know like much about the story. I just kind of knew it was about noir. I thought it was about Chinatown a lot. I knew Jack Nicholson was in it. That's really all I knew about it. And then to see like what this was about. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about it to give much away because I do agree with Dylan that it's kind of like such a good mystery that you don't really want it to unfold here, us telling you what it's about, but I did like how it unfolded. Dan described a lot of the really great parts, that like the shocking stuff. There's like some even more shocking stuff that happens after that I think is just really interesting, especially from a filmmaker like Roman Polanski, who is problematic in his own
Mm.
way. It's just a very interesting to see, what happens in this film with the director and just like think about all that together.
Yeah.
And then yeah, I love Jack Nicholson in this. I love Faye Dunaway in this. Um, and yeah, like the cutting of the nose and stuff like that, like was like holy shit, okay. Like like, do you know, Dan, did they actually cut him? Because it looks so real.
No,
Okay,
they did not cut him.
I'm like sitting there thinking, I'm like, I don't know, like did Jack Nicholson decide to go like real method with this? It's like cut
No,
me. So
no
because it
way.
looks,
Mm.
that's how good it looks though, is what I'm
Yes.
saying.
Yeah.
So,
If there was an actor to do that though, it's Jack. It's like if there's an actor that would commit to the bit like that, it's the guy who did The Shining and
yeah,
Cuckoo's Nest for sure.
true, true,
But
true.
this came before both of those, which I think is very interesting because you're kind of seeing kind of this pre-star Nicholson. Like he's famous, but he's not Nicholson as like we know him now. This is pre, like I said, Shining, pre Cuckoo's Nest, pre Batman. Like we really are seeing the first emergence of him as the movie star, not just a star or a actor or a leading man. Um, and that's one of the best things to watch about this movie is seeing his performance and how dialed in he is, kind of playing into the stereotype of like the hard-boiled detective, but also kind of being his own unconventional presentation of it. Same as Faye Dunaway. She's not the traditional femme fatale. She's kind of a little bit of a skewed version of it. And I like that, how it plays with kind of the classic noir tropes, but also tries to be something kind of new at the same time. And it's really funny because I haven't had much of an experience like this since Parasite, where I'm watching a movie, not really knowing what it is, and being like, "Oh, okay, cool. So it's about this guy who's trying to see if this lady's husband's cheating on her. Oh, and it's going to be about how he's trying to sneak around. He's going to get caught or something." And 20 minutes in, you kind of get the resolution of that. It's like, "Oh, okay, he found the photos. He's returning it to the lady. Okay, fine, whatever." And then you see the lady, and then she walks out of the office, and you're like, wait, that's not the same Faye. And I know Faye Dunaway. I'm not a huge mega fan, but I know her face. I know, and I'm like, wait, that's Faye Dunaway. That's not the lady he was talking to earlier on. And then you realize, oh, this is what it's about. It's like that Parasite thing of, oh, you thought this was about this family infiltrating this other family, and like, ha ha ha, aren't we so funny and clever? We can get away with this. No, it's about a whole another layer of things that doesn't even get introduced till later on. And that's what I love about this film. It shows exactly enough to where you can follow it, but it does not show you at all what's to come. And it lets you keep guessing as Jack Nicholson's guessing. You're kind of in his headspace the whole time, kind of discovering things as he is. You're never one step ahead of it. If anything, the screenplay is 2 or 3 steps ahead of you. And I love when a screenplay can do that because it's not confusing either. It's you're still able to follow it, which is so amazing. You're still able to follow it, even though it is a little convoluted, even though there's identity theft in terms of, is this lady the real one, or is that the real one, or where is this one? And then there's also a murder on top of that, and all the stuff with the water, which is kind of its own thing, which ends up being the inciting incident behind the motive for the murder. But it's, again, this whole other element that at first glance you think is merely there to just set the scene and say, oh, we're just giving you a sense of what California was like at the time and kind of the issues everyone was going through on a day-to-day basis to kind of get in the mindset of the time. But then you realize it's a really huge plot point later on. Like, I just think it's so brilliant how and when information is unfolded in this film. I think Robert Towne has created maybe the greatest screenplay I've ever read, because I did read the screenplay after this, and I think
Oh,
I'm just gonna say Casablanca is my favorite screenplay. I think after reading this may be like the cake. Like, I really do think this is the greatest
holy
screenplay I've ever read.
crap!
I think
Wow.
it's absolutely masterful. And
Wow.
again, like, I'm not a Polanski fan because of who he is, but there's no denying the craft here is really great. And a lot of the love I have for this film is because of the script from Robert Towne, not Polanski. So I feel even better championing this film and being like, I adore this film, because I'm more adoring the script and the performances. And the direction's great, but it's like I can praise other things that aren't directly tied to Polanski. I can praise the other stuff about it that I love so much. So, oh yeah,
That's
there it is.
Oh, hell yeah. I
Oh,
kind of want to read this now. You guys are like championing the screenplay. I
mm,
totally want to read this and start getting into just reading screenplays more often anyway. So
mhm.
that's a great recommendation, Dylan. You know, the thing about it, like, I'm always a big like proponent of, kind of not defending like problematic artists, but just saying that, just separating it if you can. If you can't, that's perfectly fine. A lot of people can't. Because if you know like what Roman Polanski did, then you're probably just gonna be like, I don't want to watch anything that person was involved with, and that's totally fine.
Yep.
But for me and a lot of other people too, I think you see that it's just there's one creator, and yet there's so many other people who've worked on the project, like Dylan just said, that it makes it easier to champion something, even though the initial like director, creator, or whatever, maybe the biggest like name on the thing, is very problematic. But also, like I was talking about, I think it's kind of interesting sometimes to look at it in the mindset of, this is from a problematic creator, and looking at the stuff inside the movie to see if like there's kind of stuff that you go, okay, this is, I see like why this was created by this
Mhm.
guy.
Well, and it dives into people in power being problematic and kind
Yeah.
of having a hold over things. And
Yep.
when you look at the end line, I mean, we'll dissect it. Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. Like, means nothing out of context. And then you see it in context. You're like, oh shit. Like, I get chills, because it's like Chinatown isn't a big part of this film in its presentation. It's a big part of Jake's mindset, though. It's all his troubles. Everything comes back to Chinatown. That's where his horrible past was. So when he's there, and of course, as soon as they get to Chinatown, which is hopefully the end of his problems, that's where he gets more problems, and that's where everything turns to shit. And at the end, it's just like, forget it. It's Chinatown, Jake. It's okay. It's not your problem. And he's like,
Yeah.
but it always has been Chinatown. That's always been the problem. And I think there's kind of an interesting irony to the fact that Roman Polanski gets to live a free man, not in America. He doesn't get to come back to America, but he is living free in Paris. No problems in the world. All he has to do is just not come to America, and he's free to live about his life. And I think there's a bit of unfairness in that. And I think that's kind of interesting parallel to see when you look at this film, that it's unfair. I mean, the fact that the last frame, I'm not going to spoil it, but the fact that one of the characters, a younger woman character in this film, is seen basically being carried off by someone who should not be, the guardian to this child, says all it needs to about how bleak of an ending this is, and how terrible of an ending it is. The fact that this is the guy who's going to take this little girl away, and you're like, oh, your heart breaks, because you know who he is in context to their relationship, and also just who he is in general, and how much of a jerk he is, So it's
Very,
sad. It's sad.
very well said, Dill. And if you want to see Roman Polanski, post everything or whatever, going to Paris and being kind of stuck there, watch the piece of shit movie called Rush Hour 3. He's in that. He makes a
And there
cameo
you go.
when
There
they
you
go to
go.
Paris.
And the other thing too is, I mean, look, you guys are all baseball fans, and I'm a huge baseball fan, and I always attribute Roman Polanski to Pete Rose. And
Hmm.
look, you cannot take away all those hits that Pete Rose had. You can't say that what he did on the field as a player isn't one of the greatest, if not one of the greatest players, which is, in my opinion, should be eligible for the Baseball Hall of Fame. What he did as a manager is completely separate than what he did as a player. And the same thing with Roman Polanski to me. You have to be able to separate the art from the man. And that's what I do with Chinatown and Rosemary's Baby and Tess. I separate the art from the man. There's hundreds of people involved in a production of a movie. And there's hundreds of people that were involved with making Chinatown besides Roman Polanski. And you can't chastise all of those people because you don't like what one person did. Yes, what he did was wrong. There's no doubt about that. But the movie Chinatown is a masterpiece. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it's a masterpiece of filmmaking, writing, acting, whatever, how you ever want to sugarcoat it or whatever. And that book that I just showed you has been acquired by Ben Affleck, and Ben Affleck is, quote unquote, supposed to be turning it into a movie. So we're going to see, hopefully someday, the behind the scenes, all this stuff, like we did.
Artist.
yeah, it's like we're getting now movies and TV shows, about the making of the movies we're talking about now. Like Godfather has The Offer. This is gonna be a show too. It's crazy just to see how ingrained this has become in society as a film. And I know people don't talk about everything in this film beat for beat specifically. They more just talk about the film in general. But like, I think there are great moments in this that I'm gonna always remember. Just like the little details throughout too, like the fact that he takes all those business cards and you're like, why is he doing that? And then you see that that's him. He says, oh yeah, I'm this guy. Here's my card. And he's just using it as a way to get through the gate. And you don't put that together. And you're like, oh, that was such a great detail. Same as Burt Young's character. I mean, we know him as the guy from Rocky, but it's like back then, this was before Rocky. He was probably just like another supporting actor. But, you know, when I'm watching this, I'm like, what is this guy's purpose? Oh, he's not in the movie anymore? Oh, fine. And then you find out he's the guy that helps him with the getaway at the end. And it's like, you use what you have. And I think Robert Towne uses what he has so well. He's like, why introduce a new character when I could just recycle one from earlier before it, which gives even more of an arc to both Jake and this character now, because now you have full arcs for this supporting character and he can do so much more. It's just so really brilliant in how he uses every little ounce of this thing. Nothing feels wasted. Everything feels intentional, but not necessarily obvious, which I like. Like it's always kind of shroud in mystery. And then later on, it looks obvious. And I can't wait to watch this again. I wish I had a time to watch this again. And maybe if there's dead time at the end of the subathon, maybe I'll just put it on again and do a watch along because I love this movie and I want to watch it again for all.
Well, one of the things, Dylan, I wanted to mention real quick because I haven't had a chance is the cops. I mean, the cops are so. Like they think they know what they're doing. They think they got the answers and they don't got the answers. And I love how bad these cops are. Jake Geddes is always one step ahead of the cops all the time. You know, I love that. And the other thing is, if you remember even like Aaron Brockovich and just movies where they kind of use things as like pieces of information and they go down to these archives or they go to this library or they go to this whatever. And I love how he uses, there's so many little things that you use and he finds information about. And let me rip that page out of that. How many times have you seen that in movies, you know? And how many since then, you know, they take this item from this and that becomes something that they need later on, you know? It's like you said, there's just so many little things in it. And I can't help but wonder what this, and it's a good looking movie, don't get me wrong, but what if this is a black and white, boy? I'm just imagining Chinatown as a black and white movie and how good could Polanski have pulled that off or not? But it's still a beautiful movie in color, so I don't have any problems with that, you know?
Yeah, like I love how those nighttime shots are filmed with him at the water and you know all that stuff, and you can kind of see the sun rising to get the feeling that he's been there all night watching this guy who's just been standing there all night waiting for the water. Like I think they do a good job showing the passing of time in this as well.
Yeah, I like to actually see a noir in color sometimes. I think it does separate it a little bit from like kind of the usual of noir, but it would be cool to see a black and white version. I do agree with that. And yeah, for Dylan's kind of like, the way he watched that, read the screenplay, and then wants to watch it again. That's exactly what I want to do now, is read the screenplay, watch it again, and then just, love it even more, because I already love it and I haven't like gone to that level yet. So very much so looking forward to this being like one of my future like favorite films potentially of all time. And I did want to piggyback of one more thing before we close this one out, that Dan was saying when he was talking about Roman Polanski, is because like that's one of the big things that I like to say, is that when you take a person who's done terrible things, for me, I'm like, a person is not just 100% a terrible piece of shit human being. Even if they've done terrible things, they're not the embodiment of all of their terrible actions. Sometimes they have done positive things, like Chinatown, like the stuff we've mentioned, and like I always like to kind of champion the positive things that have come out of it, because if not, then I'm like, what else do we do? That's I just like to take the positives from it, and so that's why I'm very excited for this to be one of my favorite films going forward.
There you go. Yeah, and another thing too is, Chad, like even if you don't read the screenplay, like it's still very obvious. Like the dialogue is still very good. You can get that just by watching it too, and just the plotting of the film is so good. Like even if you don't read all the ins and outs of the screenplay, like just a film is like this is just so well plotted, where like I'm always on the edge of my seat watching it. Like
Definitely,
I knew even before I read the screenplay that this was an all timer, and reading it back, I'm like, wow, like this is. There's just such a cynical like hopelessness in 70s cinema that like usually I don't like gravitating toward, because I'm like Chad, like I love the positivity and kind of like a hopeful happy ending, but something about the 70s, the way the films are made, the solemn kind of hopeless cynical endings just work so well for me. I don't know why. Like I think because they all have to say something about the world, and oddly they are all kind of relevant still. Like the idea that like Dan was saying, the cops, they don't know shit in this movie, like, and they actually add fuel to the fire at the end, and you see that Jake is one step ahead of everyone, but at the end it doesn't matter because it's Chinatown. Like it does not matter, life sucks anyway, and you're always going to end up at the bottom of the barrel, and that's kind of a sad thing to say, but also like I think it's a realer thing to say than your traditional 50s 60s happy ending. I think we kind of saw that switch from the 60s to 70s, and I think that's why this film works so well, and why a lot of other films that we'll talk about very soon all end in a kind of similar way. It's this kind of idea, is something in the air of the 70s, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, it's kind of something we needed to hear, or they needed to hear. I wasn't alive, but they needed to hear back then. Dan was. He was born this year, 1974. They needed to hear, that life can't always get, we can't always get the things we want. And
it's a favorite decade. This is Dylan. There's a reason why it's my favorite decade. It's just has the movies that have come out in this decade. You can't compare the movies that came out in the 70s to any other decade. You can try, but there just isn't any comparison. And I know friends of ours will say, well, the 80s was the greatest. I think the 70s is the greatest era of film. It's just not because I was born in 1974. If you just go back through history and just look at the films, it's just, there's something about the filmmakers, the actors, the films. I mean, that's why I keep saying this decade, the one we're in now, is going to be a sad decade, because a lot of my favorites are up there in age. I'm telling you, we got 7 years left of this decade. I'm worried. I'm worried about a lot of bad things happen to a lot of great people in this decade.
Yeah. Well, and what you talked about is like cinema as a whole. I mean, look at when the Oscars started in the 20s. 50 years later, we're in the 70s. 50 years later, we're in 2020s. Like this is exactly the middle point between the start of the Oscars and where we are now. And the 70s is kind of that middle where I think we see a lot of the change from the golden age classic. Everyone's smiling. You get a lot of your Singing in the Rains, Happy Dancing, Mary Poppins, Sound of Music. These are all musicals, but I'm just thinking of happier stuff. And then to see this transition in the 70s to then get your 80s and 90s of your Scorseses and your Lynches and these more cynical, kind of grittier, artsier filmmakers. And I think the 70s is a branching off point because it also influenced so many of the filmmakers we're seeing today. Like the Safdies and Paul Thomas Anderson, all the people who are still like thriving. So I think this era and this film, especially because it's also borrowing from older stuff like noir, which is mostly seen in the 30s, 40s, and now you're kind of bringing back to a more modern lens, and it feels like one of the last great noirs because everything since kind of feels almost like neo noir or like kind of a newly inspired version of it, like a Blade Runner, where it's like there's similarities, but it's in a more retro or futuristic way, you know.
And I recommend go see Marlowe, guys, if you have a chance, because you're like, damn it, I just saw Chinatown. Now I'm looking at Marlowe, and you're like, dang it, man, Marlowe. Liam Neeson channels Philip Marlowe, but Philip Marlowe is a lot. Jake Gittes is a lot like Philip Marlowe, so you're like, that's Philip Marlowe. You know what I mean? In a lot of ways, you know.
And even some of the great films post 1970s are still harkening back to the 70s. You know, with your Linklaters and your Dazed and Confused and your what is it? Licorice Pizzas.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like 70s is to us like the 30s and 20s were for the 70s. It's like so weird to just look at things in perspective. And kind of what Chad brought up with the history, like Watergate is still such a big thing. So like scandals and government power and all that, that's something we'll see in a lot of these films, if not all these films, because like I think that's just such a topical thing, and why the 70s in general are so cynical, but I think that's why it's important to look at as a historical landmark as well.
You couldn't get away with the 70s. You couldn't get away with stuff anymore after the 70s. There was always people watching and keeping an eye on and checking and calling you out for stuff. After the 70s was the beginning of that, where nope, don't think so, Richard Nixon. Nope, don't think so, this one. Don't think so, that one, whatever, you know?
Yeah. But John Huston plays that guy in this movie, but is very much probably a good guy in real life. I mean, he gave us Angelica Houston, so can't complain. But yeah.
Were you talking about like there's like some sort of like rise of surveillance that we might end up talking about?
I don't know. Surveillance. I don't know. I better get through the awards Chinatown one, because I feel like we might be bugged. They might be listening. I don't know. We'll get there in one sec. Chinatown wins one award. It's nominated for 11, but it only wins one. But I think it is the most fitting one. That's Robert Towne for Best Original Screenplay. It is nominated for Best Picture, for Best Director for Roman Polanski, Best Actor for Jack Nicholson, Best Actress for Faye Dunaway, Best Original Dramatic Score, Best Costume Design, Best Sound, Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, and Best Film Editing. I swear, I feel like we're being bugged. I feel like we're being listened to. I feel like they're listening to our conversation. Chad, why don't you tell us about the conversation?
The Conversation, directed and written by Francis Ford Coppola. Cinematography by Bill Butler. Music by David Shire. Starring Gene Hackman, John Cazale, Alan Garfield, Cindy Williams, and Frederick Forrest. Synopsis. A surveillance expert agonizes over a recording that could lead to a potential murder.
Great. All right. So, Chad, I'll start with you. Had you seen this film before, and what do you think of this film?
No, I've never seen this movie. I didn't know really what it was about. I guess a conversation, but I thought it was going to be more so like a conversation between like people, like main characters or something like that. I didn't know it was about a thing that was a conversation that some dude is going to listen to over and over and over throughout the entire film, basically, trying to, you know, figure this thing out and, you know, see if there's something he could stop, like something from his past he's afraid that's going to come back again if he were to give this conversation to someone else that could use it to do something terrible. And, you know, just that mixed with this whole, you know, paranoia.
He's afraid that's going to come from his past. He's afraid that's going to come. He's afraid that's going to come.
Sorry, I just needed to listen to my my surveillance tape footage of you. That was my segue bit that I was gonna plan, but then I forgot to do it, so I had to do it while you were talking about your thoughts.
You're recording me right now?
I'm sorry, Chad. I was recording.
Oh wait, yeah, I see it. I see it right over there. It's recording. Yeah, no, but yeah, this guy is basically, you know, he's like uber religious, but like very like paranoid about, you know, stuff because he's a surveillance expert. Why wouldn't you then also be paranoid that people might be bugging you and might be listening to you because you're doing it? Why wouldn't other people do it to you as well? And I feel like this movie like gets into that like paranoia like very well. Like don't watch this high or something. Like if that's kind of a thing, you might get really paranoid because I got paranoid just watching this movie, sober. So yeah, and just great performances all around. Very simple movie, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, simple. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, when you look at a director making two movies that are
Yeah.
Best Picture nominees in the same year, you got to compare them. I mean, that's what comes to your brain. And you look at Godfather Part II, which is an epic, and then you look at this film, which is quiet. It's it takes place in very minimal locations, 1, 2, 3 locations max. It's about this guy who just sits and listens to a tape over and over. Like, it's a very small film in comparison, but I think it gets just as many emotions and like you said, the paranoia feeling. Like, you can still feel things from this film that you can feel from an epic film like The Godfather Part 2. There's just different things you feel. And I agree with you. Like, the sense of paranoia and the idea that himself is making himself paranoid by the way he's going about trying to, get what he needs and deliver on this promise. But then also, when it's time to even hand in the footage, he's afraid that it's going to get in the wrong hands and he's going to be guilty. And, it never goes that extreme mile of making things too unrealistic to where things spiral out of control. It's still very contained, but I think because it's contained, it feels more realistic. And in that sense, by being more realistic, it feels all the much more emotional for the audience member because it's a much more relatable experience. And that to me is terrifying. And Gene Hackman, I think, plays that so well, but also just the way it's shot, filmed, executed. They really get in that headspace really well, of that internalized kind of boxed in kind of feeling, which I like, but also don't like as someone who gets very anxious watching movies like this.
Yeah, two other quick things. One, I forgot to mention Harrison Ford is in this.
Yeah,
And
pre Star Wars and pre
didn't
or
write
year
that
after
down for some
American
reason.
Graffiti, right? Year after 73. Yeah, so a
Yes.
year after.
Yes. Yeah. And the other thing is, like, even like when they keep playing the recording, a lot of the times it's kind of like, that he's trying to like mess with the I guess, like, how it sounds. So it sounds all
back again. If you
Sorry.
don't do that to me.
That's so
You set it up
crazy,
for
man.
us.
So sometimes it like sounds all warped and stuff like that. And I just
Mhm.
thought it was like really cool how they did that with the sound
Yeah.
recording. And
I said in my review on Letterboxd, it's the best use of sound as a character in the film that
Yeah.
I've seen since Sound of Metal, which I know Sound of Metal came out
Well,
years after, but it feels
yeah,
like
you've seen some sound of
that I've seen since Sound of Metal, where like I feel like the sound is an integral part, not just to the movie, but to the plot, to the story, and to the overall effect of it too. But Dan, had you seen this one? I'm assuming you had.
Oh yeah, I saw this. I've seen this a few times. I'm a huge Gene Hackman fan, and obviously Francis Ford Coppola and John Cazale. So this is a must see for me.
that how you
But
say it?
say that again.
I said, is that how you say it? Cazale?
Cazale, yeah,
not
John Cazale, Cazale. Some people, there's a lot. I just say John Cazale. But Gene Hackman, by the way, guys, looks identical to my father in this point in his life. I mean, identical. Think of Gene Hackman. That's what my father looks like. But no, even when the guy's trying to enjoy himself, he can't enjoy himself. He's at a party, but all he can think about, and these guys are gonna kind of needle in him about this and that, and it's just annoying. And then when Cazale's messing around tinkering over there, and he's like, "Will you shut up? Will you stop doing that? I'm trying to figure this out." And the thing is, you think to yourself, what is there something that you may have done in your life? Did you wrong somebody? Is somebody out to get you? It makes you think. This film makes you think, do I have to look over my shoulder all the time? Is somebody surveilling me? Is this piece of device, am I being tracked right now by this piece of device?
Probably.
And what we're talking on this computer right here? Do I have people outside my door ready to get me if I do something wrong? I mean, this is the beginning of it, because we were dealing with Watergate. We were dealing with corruption. And you're like, oh, now this is what we got going on in society. You know what I mean? And they really bring that into the forefront. This is a little movie. It didn't cost a lot of money. He did this in between the Godfather movies. I guess it just happened to release in the year of 1974. I think it was supposed to come out in 73. That's weird that it came out in 74. But you just it makes you really paranoid about the world around you and everything, every decision you make and whatnot. And I'll tell you right now, how do you get Art Carney and Albert Finney in Best Actor, and you don't get Gene Hackman? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, that Best Actor category, just seeing who won. I've never seen Harry and Tonto, and I don't know, Dan, if you ever watched it.
Yeah,
because
I
know you're
did.
trying to get your hands on
I
it.
finally saw it.
I mean, I'm reading the synopsis. It seems very sweet. It actually seems like Chad's cup of tea. It's a guy and his cat, but it's like
not a
I
bad
just
movie.
don't. Yeah, but I just don't like. You look at this slate. There are so many like all-time great performances, and not just great actors like Gene Hackman, Jack Nicholson, Al Pacino. But like, I would argue that these are maybe the best of their careers. Every single one of them.
Yeah.
And then there's another one we'll talk about next, but that's another story. But yeah, like it's crazy to me that, and not crazy because I haven't seen the movie, so I can't say that. But it's just wild to me that this wasn't even nominated. It just goes to show how stacked that slate was, or that they were just not for it. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it touched a little too close to home for people at that time.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well, and that was a good point with Watergate. I mean, Chad brought it up. Like, that is the thing right now that everyone's going crazy over. And I think there's a reason it was released this year and not the year before. Maybe they wanted to kind of wait till it was even more topical. I mean, it reminds me of when Spielberg had, like, I think he had just finished or was about to finish Ready Player One, and then he just throws the post out there, and it happens to be like super timely and topical. And you're like, oh, you just made this in like a few weeks or few months. Like, some of these directors are just so good that they, by doing little to nothing in terms of showmanship and presentation, are still leagues better than any other director's best. Like, Coppola's reining it in is still better than most directors at their hardest trying, and I'm not saying he's reining it in, but compared to The Godfather, where he's clearly putting most of his attention, this seems very much like his back burner project of like, I'm writing this novel, I'm about to write another novel, let me just write this really nice poem that I'm going to put in this newspaper. It's a really good poem,
It's a little art house film that he said, you know what, I want to take a break from the pressure of The Godfather. I'm just going to do this little thing that I got to. He knew about what was going on with Watergate and all that stuff. So, yeah, let me put this out there and whatever. And then, it just turned into this really hot button thing that sometimes those are the films that get nominated. And there's a thing about I don't know if this is a think piece or there's a book on this or what, but there's a theory that the films that get nominated for Best Picture are a lot of times get nominated for a reason. And it's sometimes the year that they're in that they get nominated. Like the opposite, like Nomadland got nominated that year and won that year, or Parasite that year, or blah, 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 going all the way back. You know what I mean? And there was a reason why The Conversation got nominated for Best Picture this year, Yeah.
And it's amazing that the Academy didn't hold it against him that he made two great films in the same year. Like, because you can't, because he was just firing on all cylinders. Even though this is a totally different type of film, he still made a really good one. Like, this is, I know I said reining it in, and that was the wrong phrase to use, but this is very much, he's very much putting less resources into this. This very much feels like, it's like if you have a Major League Baseball player playing in a minor league field, maybe in that sense, even the home run makes a lot more of an impact on a minor league field, because it's like, wow, like you were able to do this while you're also hitting home runs in the big leagues. I mean, I can't wait to talk about The Godfather Part II, because it's so different than what Coppola did here, but I can't wait to talk about it because it's like, just how did he come up with two films that have also endured legacy? Like, people still talk about this film, and I see shades of it in stuff like Sopranos. It deals in a lot of I mean, that's an older show now, but I just watched it for the first time a few years ago. But like stuff like that, where it's very heavily influenced by surveillance and trying to like catch the mob, and even in Breaking Bad, the idea that he has to like hide things in his walls and doesn't want people to catch him. I mean, there's a lot of shades of this type of movie in a lot of the TV and films we're seeing nowadays, that kind of paranoia thriller. This one is just a little bit more. Yeah, The Wire as well. I haven't seen it, but it's called The Wire. So yeah, but it's really interesting. And I don't think this film could be made today. And if it did, it kind of would come off probably a little cheap, because it's going to have to deal into phones and laptops. And like I think there's something even more special about the fact that it's not technology. It's literally him looking for a microphone, which is why in that last scene when he rips apart the walls in his apartment, like, it's just like, whoa. And then at that point, he just has to kind of give up and start playing his clarinet anyway, or saxophone anyway, and you're like, whoa, so this man's just gonna constantly live in this cycle of hell. And I'm like, wow, that's so crazy. It's again that cynicism that I talked about in Chinatown. It's like it ends on this like horrible note of like the world is just always going to be unfair to you because of what you do in your profession. And I'm like, geez, these heroes in these films, in literally every single one of these films, has it tough. I mean, like, to be a detective in Chinatown, to be a surveillance guy at the time of Watergate, to be the head of a mafia crew, to be a comedian on the trying to fight for free speech, and then to be a firefighter when people are trying to build buildings however the fuck they want. Like, it's crazy how all these films have a very similar thing to say about professions at the time, but also kind of today.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think the movie could be made today, but I do totally agree that it would be very different, and it would just be a different kind of way.
Yeah.
In fact, the movie kind of has been remade a little bit. I don't know if Dan is thinking of the same thing I'm thinking of.
I think it's a sequel. Don't quote me on that. I think it might be like a what's that word? How do you a something sequel in a way where you have Gene Hackman in the conversation 30 years prior, and then Enemy of the State comes out 30 years later, where he's in a freaking warehouse and he's got like all these traps, and he's got gates, and he's got everything all around him. Nobody can get to him, and he's stuck in there by himself. He's Brill, and he's got the. People are saying that's kind of like a I don't know what the word is.
Spiritual sequel.
Spiritual sequel.
Yeah.
A spiritual sequel of the conversation, and that's
Chad. What was the one you were thinking of?
30-something years later of what he had become.
I gotta check that out. We're not on the same wavelength, actually. Okay. I was thinking of, because it's great that Dylan brought up Breaking Bad, because I was thinking of, and I'm trying not to spoil this, because I was thinking of Better Call Saul. Because I know Dylan hasn't seen it, and I don't know about Dan.
I've seen a few seasons.
There is a specific character who goes through something like Gene Hackman's character does, but in a different way.
When does it take place, though, Chad? When does it take place?
Better Call Saul?
Yeah, like, does it take place modern day, like 2020s, or?
Well, it's like
that's a period piece to Breaking Bad, so probably
right.
90s.
Yeah, my point was that I don't think you can make it as effective with modern technology. I think the charm of it is that everything is so like
flip phones
old fashioned. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's a good example then.
Maybe
yeah, because like I think about like Punch Drunk Love. Like, could you make that with cell phones? I think the charm is the fact that all the phones have cords in that film. Like, it makes it so much funnier, like darkly comedic. Like I just think there's a charm about the tangibility.
You're absolutely correct. I wasn't trying to say that you're not correct. That
no, I know. Yeah, I got you.
This movie isn't uniquely 70s. I think it totally is. I just think like if they made it, just like you said before, like it would just have to be totally different.
Right.
But like you could totally make a paranoia film today, like just like in the same vein, but it would just be a little different.
Yeah. No, I would love to see some modern.
Definitely check out Enemy of the State, guys. You'd be like, oh, okay, now I see. Yeah.
I feel like if you remade it today with like modern technology, you have to go full like supernatural or full like fantasy, where like the house, like all the devices are like in on it together, like it's almost like an AI type thing, and like the cameras in the building are watching you, and like you can't. I don't know. I think it'd be cool.
Like Smart House,
kind of, I guess, or even like Megan in a way, like she's always watching, always listening. I mean, it's very
1984.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know. I just think it's a very interesting premise, even though it feels so minuscule in comparison in scope and style. But I don't think that's a bad thing either. Like, I think that's a good thing. It shows that there's versatility for Coppola, and that not everything has to be like this giant epic. Because when I think of Coppola, I think of Godfather Part II, and Apocalypse Now. But I forget that there were also littler films there, like The Outsiders, another film I love of his. Like these smaller films that are just really well contained, just really good stories. Like, it doesn't have to be these big blockbusters. Not everyone's a Jim Cameron, and that's fine too. You can be a Jim Cameron, and even Jim Cameron has taken a few.
I was just about to say. I mean, like, True Lies is like a big action movie, but it's like nothing compared to like Avatar and Titanic on the level of scale and stuff. So even Jim Cameron can. The Terminator's a very small movie made for $6 million. compared to
or you have like a Spielberg who says, I'm gonna drop Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in the same year. And it's like,
Right?
all right, Schindler's List is not the same in terms of blockbuster, but it is still one of the most monumental films of that time
That's
and all
how
time.
you
So
you have a true like auteur who can just like do anything, big movies, small movies, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, just a visionary. Well, the conversation sadly not up for as many Oscars as The Godfather Part II or as any of these other films. It's only up for 3, and it doesn't win any. It's nominated for Best Picture, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Sound, but that's okay because it is still a great film.
I can't wait to talk about The Godfather Part 2.
Wait, what?
I can't wait to talk about The Godfather Part 2.
I accidentally recorded myself talking earlier. Well, I apparently can't wait for it, so let's talk about it. Let's talk about
right
I
now.
don't know, but according to Gene Hackman, who has apparently been surveilling me, I want to talk about The Godfather Part 2. So let's talk about it, Chad. Let's talk about The Godfather Part 2. I want to say this is my best episode of Segways, but I've still got 2 left, so I will not say that yet.
All right, we're not talking about The Cat Father. We're talking about The Godfather Part 2, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, written
Who's that?
by Francis Ford Coppola and Mario Puzo, a cinematography by Gordon Willis, and music by Nino Rota. Starring Al Pacino, Robert Duvall, Diane Keaton, Robert De Niro, Talia Shire, Morgana King, John Cazale, Mariana Hill, and Lee Strasberg. Synopsis: Michael protects the family business as we see his father, Vito Corleone's rise to power. Based on The Godfather by Mario Puzo.
Yeah. And we talked about how much we love The Godfather, so we don't need to preface that. That was all of our favorite movie of the last month. But I'm interested to talk because I know we've all seen this movie before, obviously, but I know for Chad, it's only like a second or third watch.
This is my second watch, yes.
For me, it's also my second watch. And I'll be honest, the first time I watched this was a long time ago to where like a lot of it felt new. And Dan, who I'm sure have seen this a lot of times. So I want to start with you, Dan, because you are a guest and this is like the movie you came to talk about. So I want to know, Dan, what are your thoughts on this film, having seen it a bunch of times, and like where do you fall? I guess we also have to talk about the whole, do you like the first one better? Do you like this one better? Or do they exist totally separately and they shouldn't be compared because they're both great? Let me know.
I knew it was you, Fredo.
Oh, man.
I'll tell you right now.
I'm gonna cry.
John Cazale, he's in 2 movies that are nominated for Best Picture this year, and 72, and 78. The guy, and Dog Day Afternoon, which you guys
75.
already put that up. 75.
Yeah, very next year.
But the thing about this, look, my favorite actor of all time is Robert De Niro. And I don't think I've ever seen Robert De Niro play a character so nuanced and so subtle in his entire career. He wins an Oscar for playing young Vito Corleone, and it's like hand gestures and little things, and like how he maneuvers the boss, and then gets him, and he turns around, and he shoots him and stuff, and then all of a sudden the people are like, oh, you don't pay for this, and here's some fruit, and like he becomes like the savior of the neighborhood. You know what I mean? And then juxtapose that to this guy who has gone into hell, and like he sets senators up in saunas, and he kills his own brother. But once his mother died of natural causes, he waits till she dies to go kill his own brother because he can't forgive his brother for going against the family. You never go against the family, Dylan. What the heck is wrong with you? You never go against the family.
You want to tell me? I was not the one last episode who wanted to be in that family. That was very much you, Dan, who wanted to be a part of the curling.
Hey, that's why you don't go against the family. You don't want this to happen to you. But and then you just see the wife. What's her name again? Diane Keaton. Just, you look at her eyes, and it's just like her eyes have become black, and it's like they're in like a pit. She's just nothing on her face. She's just like, and when she gives that news about that thing that happened, and you see his face just go like, and then, I don't condone hitting women, but I don't know if any of us could have held back at that moment you know, what she told him. I would never bring a child of yours into this world ever again. I mean, just and this guy over here, Dylan. I mean, Chad, he's about to have a child, and he's like, dang it, man, this is cannot be easy for you guys to watch this. But also, like I said, the two sides of it are completely different, but they're beautiful and amazing in their own way. And this is an absolute epic masterpiece of filmmaking. I never thought he could recapture the magic all over again, but he does it. They do it again 2 years later, and it's like, how could this possibly be happening? And like I said on the last episode, put these two films together, watch them from beginning to end, and you got an epic like I don't think you've ever seen before. Because that cut of The Godfather and The Godfather 2 together is cut. Oh, Kill Bill, Volume 2 together or whatever. No, you really got to see these two films tied together. And I guess you could do it on TV. You couldn't probably do it in the theater that way, but that's how I saw it. I saw it on TV. But
I've seen it a few times where they play the Godfather epic, where they start with him as a kid into Robert De Niro, and then they go into the first Godfather, and then they finish with the Pacino stuff in this one. Like, you can kind of see it in chronological order. I've always said I think it's very interesting that the only other film to kind of like nail this technique of being a prequel and sequel all at the same time is Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, where you see how she met the three dads and you also see the future of it. I think it's a really good device. I think it's an interesting way to tell a story, but it doesn't merely exist just to be like, oh, let's show the background. It like actually serves a point in the narrative to show Vito, who goes from nothing to building himself to something and ends on a high, happy ending, to Pacino's, to Michael Corleone, where he's thrown into it. He's given everything. He starts with everything on a silver platter. He doesn't really have to do much. He starts with all this stuff. His family set up for him, and to see how he kind of rises and to see their rises simultaneously back and forth, cutting back and forth, to see where they both end up, where Vito is at the top. And then Michael is also at the top, but at what cost? And I think the cost for Michael is so much worse. And that's why it's so crazy to see these different time periods to show just how you think, because Vito starts at the worst beginnings. I mean, his father's killed. He's sent to America by himself. You think it's going to be nothing but trouble for him, but it's the opposite. Whereas Michael, you think, oh, things can't get worse. He's on top. But they go the opposite way. It's so crazy how they go in polar opposites from one another, to where you end the film in totally different places, where now Michael's in shit and Vito's at the top. I just think that's always been such a great story device for this film, to frame those two storylines next to one another. I always admit I'm a little bit more intrigued by the Michael stuff than the Vito stuff. Every time it goes to the Vito stuff, I still love it, but I'm just so invested in Michael's story, because we all talked about last episode how much of an amazing character Michael is and how well written he is and his great arc. I think his story here is even more layered and complex, because of the first one, he's just this innocent guy who's kind of tormented by the mob, but now he's fully there, and now it kind of shows all the complications that he must take on himself, that he was always trying to protect his father from. Now he's the guy. Now he's the one who's getting the assassination attempts. Now he's the one who has to literally make that choice to spare Fredo or not. And it's kind of that thing where the first one, it's like, don't go against the family. But now it's this one, it's like, well, what happens when you do and you're in the family? And it's like, oh, crap, what's going to happen? And that whole reveal where Fredo is like, oh, nice to meet you. And then later on at the party, he's talking as if he knows the guy. And then Michael puts two and two together, like, oh, shit, Fredo knows who he is. That sucks. And the guy he knows is also Junior Soprano from The Sopranos, so that's pretty fun to see. Dominic Cini's in a very small role, but that moment is heartbreaking, because in the scene it's festive, it's a party or whatever, and then he comes up to him, he's like, I knew it was you, Fredo, give him the kiss on the face, and it's like there's a happiness around him, but in the center it's this horrible thing, because it's never going to end well for Fredo.
And then Fredo trying to get away, he says, Fredo, come here, I'll help you out.
The only thing saving his life is the fact that his mother's still alive, and he would not kill him while his mother's alive. But that's merely buying time. That does not mean anything, because as soon as she's gone, boom, Fredo's gone. And that's so. And I'm going to spoil it, obviously, because people have seen it. I mean, like,
this is a 50-year-old.
We're going to talk about spoil. Yeah, exactly. Like, and this is a film where I feel like a lot of people know it as the one where Fredo betrays Michael. but there's so much more to it. But I want to hear from you, Chad, too, because I know this is only your second watch of it. What do you think of this film? Because I know how much of a fan we all are of the first one.
Yeah, I'll show my hand here. I don't think this one is nearly as good as the first movie is. I think the first movie is like this 3-hour like masterpiece of like one like singular arc that like is just paid off so well at the end. And I don't think this movie does that well. Like I'm one who I wonder what the two stories would have been like as their own kind of movies, because it feels a little weird. And I'm actually the opposite of you, Dylan, a little bit, where I actually find the Vito stuff a little bit more interesting than Michael stuff, because I like, the Michael's story ending kind of at the end of the first movie, and then I don't really care about his story all that much after that, because all he does is just be a jerk the entire movie, and I just don't care to watch that much. I do agree with Dan though. I thought that the stuff between him and his wife was very interesting, and I don't necessarily agree that like it's that any person might have hit her or anything like that,
no.
because that's I understand like where it's coming from, because
This
it's
is
like
the 70s, Chad. You forget. Trust me. I have
understand.
an abusive family. I had abusive family. This happened a lot in the 70s.
I understand.
It seems warranted in the context of like it makes sense why Michael would do it, because that is who Michael is. But I know Chad, you're speaking as Chad. Chad would never do it, and I wouldn't either. Like I think even if I was pushed to that point, like I can totally see why she's doing that too. I'm like, she is validated, because would I want to bring a baby into that world with that type of father? Probably not. No.
Yeah, there's so many parallels between her and Skylar White from Breaking Bad. It's like, trying to kill yourself, and just you don't want to bring a baby into this world. I totally agree with that. And then I do see it from his side. Like, how would you feel if your wife did that without even saying anything to you or consulting you at all? Like, ultimately it is her choice because it's her body, but at the end of the day, it's also his child. So like, but this is a whole mob story, so it's very different. It's a whole thing. But and no, I'm not trying to say that I don't like this movie. I think this movie is great. I think the Michael stuff is great with Fredo. That is like the crux of that story that I think is really great. And Dylan and Dan both really hit it on the nose, all the great parts of that story. The Vito stuff, I don't know. I'm just very interested in look at what Vito became, and then look at where he started and look at how he became. And I just think Robert De Niro is just fantastic in that role, so that I'm just like very interested. And for me, I think the film kind of, it feels a little uneven at times for me, because like I'm watching, I see a lot of the Vito stuff, the Michaels, because it starts with Vito, then it goes to Michael, and back to Vito, and then it's with Michael and Fredo and stuff for like a very long time before it finally goes back to Vito. And I'm like, why can't you have given me more Vito so it feels a little bit more even? So I don't know if on future watches maybe I'll see the things that you guys have said and seen, like it kind of marries like really well, and like the mirrors of both and stuff, but it just feels like I just wanted more Vito at some point. But that's kind of really where I fall with this one. So I don't know, because I know a lot of people put both of these like right side by side, and people are like, why didn't Godfather Part 2 end up on the Sight and Sound list and stuff? And I'm like, I kind of get it, to be honest. Like I would definitely put The Godfather, I'm sorry, I know it's sacrilege, I would put The Godfather on there for sure, but The Godfather Part 2 I think is just a cut underneath for me.
Well, and also like when you're picking, like, because they're compiling top 10 lists too, it's like, are you really going to waste 2 spots on a top 10 list for the same franchise? It's like, that's probably why none of the Star Wars films made it on either, because half of the people are probably putting Star Wars, half are putting Empire. If all those people settled on one movie, that would probably make the list. And I think that's what happened this year, is they all picked Godfather, and that's how they made it on the list, and Godfather 2 didn't. Even though they did release the top 250 recently, and Godfather Part 2 was like 135 or something, so it was like very close to the top 100, but it didn't make the official 100. But like just on the point of the hitting thing, like I agree. Like I think in that moment, I've always saw it more from Diane Keaton as the more empathetic person always. Like I've always taken her side through pretty much every moment of these two films. And so I'm always in support of that decision in that moment. But I can also see why Michael reacts the way he does. I don't condone it, but I also, in that context of what's happening, I see, especially because of what type of family this is. I mean, like this is really crazy. And kind of having just come off of the scene where Vito has his kids and he's holding little Michael. And, like, I think that's why it works having both of them in the same movies, because you can kind of see how, yes, Vito was doing all this criminal stuff, but his life was just getting better and better and better, and Michael's is just getting worse and worse and worse. And I think that is really interesting to see, though I do see what you mean, Chad, in terms of how long they take with each segment, maybe cut a little bit more back and forth so it feels almost back and forth rather than like, I see what you mean. But I definitely see what you mean. I do prefer the first one because I just think Michael's innocence to darkness is much more interesting than his darkness to Breaking Bad. Like this feels like the last season of Breaking Bad, where it's like we've seen Walter descend and now he's fully at his evil nature, and it's like more of like, now what? Now how does he get away with it? And we see, I won't spoil that show, but like, and this show, it's in this film, it's kind of like, now what? And there's still another one to go too, which I think is interesting, which I've never seen. I've never seen the third Godfather, so I don't know.
Well, I just have a couple more things I want to touch on, Dylan. Yeah. Okay. First of all, what I like is, the cinematography, we talk about it for the first film, and it's just this is gorgeous. It has this grain. It just has this look about it. But if you look at the Vito stuff, that similar vibe in the cinematography was there for the Vito stuff. And then the Michael stuff, it had a different kind of cinematography.
Yeah.
So it would look distinctly different. And then
the Vito has like that yellow hue over it, almost like your Denis Villeneuve Enemy type vibe. Like it's kind of all this yellow gold coating. Yeah.
Yeah. Which, I mean, just, oh God, I love the cinematography.
It is beautiful.
In the Godfather. And then the other thing is, too, is we forget this is the beginning of women's lib. This is the beginning of women taking control of their lives and saying, I am something. I am worth something. I am somebody. And the thing where Kay, she had no control over nothing. The one thing she had control over was the one thing. I'm never going to bring a demon child of yours into this world ever again, Michael, and blah, 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 blah. And so in the context of women's lib and controlling yourself in a family that you have no control over whatsoever, you took control. And that in the 70s was a really big thing for her to do in that movie, in that movie. And the other thing too is it's like, you're dealing with are you all right, Dylan?
Yeah, I dropped my phone. I'm preparing the next segue, and I dropped my phone because Karma's trying to tell me to just focus on the movie at hand and not prepare what you're going to segue to Lenny with. Oh, okay. It's my bad.
And, we're dealing with we dealt with a little bit with the Irishman, and we deal with Nixon and Watergate. And you have. It's like the Senate and all these hearings. I don't know. Oh, you're a Yankees fan, Dylan, so you're going to go and you're going to get into a hearing. How dare you be a Yankees fan or blah, blah. I'm like, they were doing hearings.
I like to win.
Like all these hearings because he's supposed they were criminals and this and that and the other. And then this guy's a turncoat. And it's like, and then Lee Strasberg is considered one of the greatest acting coaches of all time, and he's like this Jew who's trying to take everything away from Michael. He's hiding in Israel, and they're in Cuba. There's just so much going on in this movie, but it's like two movies in one. That's what makes it so great. How he was able to cram two great movies into one great movie. Then you still have The Godfather, which isn't a great movie. So you got, in a way, three movies in two movies, and it's like Godfather galore.
Yeah. No, I agree. I do think, you can't get too much Godfather, even if you prefer one over the other. Yeah, there was another thing I was going to bring up, but I forget. Oh, the scene at the end where they go back in time again, and you see them at dinner where Vito's about to come home for his birthday.
Added on.
Love that scene.
Is that added
wasn't
on?
in the original cut. That is
Oh.
not in the original. They added
I
that
love
on.
that scene, though.
Where did you watch this on? Paramount Plus or do you
No,
have a
I watched this
Blu-ray or
on the
something?
I have the Chad and I both have the Coppola restoration
Yeah.
Blu-rays from like
That's
5-10 years ago. Yeah,
they added that
I'm
on.
glad they added it on because I love
Wasn't that
that scene
amazing?
because it's a heartbreaker because you get James Caan back, which is great. You get a little Sonny action, which I always love Sonny. But you also see that even
One by one.
when Michael wasn't involved with the family in terms of the family crime, he wanted to go off in the army or whatever. Everyone gave him shit. Who was the one guy who supported him? Fredo. And
Yeah.
that's like a big F you to Michael. And I get what Chad said. Like he's unlikable in this film, but I think there's almost like a sadness. I think having watched the first one, there's more of a
Yeah.
sadness of like, oh, like he was so good. Like what happened to him? Whereas I think, yeah, if you start the film at this point and only see this film, I think it's worse. But I think because of the context of the first, but again, a film should stand on its own. And I do think he's very unlikable in this one. But I mean, just that whole last scene, the added scene where Fredo's like the one who's like, oh, I'm supportive of you, Michael. I think that's great. Like, oh, it's just so sad because it's like
I know
yeah.
Chad wants to say something, but real quick, I'm glad you brought that up, Dylan, because if you notice, one by one, they all get around the table. What's his face? Tessio brings in the cake,
Mhm.
and then one by one, they all disappear, and he's there all alone, sitting at the table. And so that was meant to be. Michael is now all alone. He has nobody he could trust, nobody that he cares about. Nothing matters to him. He started out as this young, innocent guy with this whole family, this beautiful wife, this whole 9 yards. And then one by one, they all disappeared in his life. And he's in that hole all by himself. I know Chad,
like he's by himself then, and then at the end he's by himself again. Like there's no way he doesn't end up alone, and that's why I think losing Kay is one of those things he'll regret. I haven't seen the third one, so I'm interested to see what they'll do with all that stuff. So, Chad, what else did you have to say?
Well, no, same. I'm very excited to see the third one now, and then maybe rewatch all of them in kind of like some sort of order or whatever.
The epic, the Godfather epic, watching in chronological order. Yeah.
Very excited.
27 hours.
I love that you brought up that end scene because all of this discussion is recontextualizing the movie for me a lot because I love how they added that. Breaking Bad, I know we keep making references, but it's heavily influenced by this trilogy. So at least, especially these first two movies, and Breaking Bad has a lot of these scenes where you'll see who Walter White has become, and then they'll go back and showing his like kind of hope for the future and stuff like that, and then you see like his house and his hope for that house. He's like, oh, it's a starter house, and then you see like what he and the house has become, and just all the parallels. I just think is brilliant, and I love. I think it was a great addition of this scene, just like you said, at the end, because I do think it recontextualizes the movie and kind of, explains, that the movie a little bit better. So it's interesting that they didn't have that in the original cut, because I think that's a really great addition to what it is to help explain stuff a little bit more.
When Coppola he has a archivist that oversaw all the restorations. He specifically wanted that in there that he couldn't do back then, that he wanted people to see this and get a whole new kind of idea of what Michael was going through, because he felt like that you didn't really understand what Michael was really going through at the end of The Godfather Part II. But now with that added in, you kind of do understand what he was going through, because one by one, they're all gone and he's all alone in hell by himself.
Yeah. I've always heard people complain about George Lucas adding stuff to the Star Wars movies with every new technological advancement. And I've always been like, yeah, no, like a director should just leave a film be, unless there's a director's cut, like leave it be, unless it's a whole other cut. But then I'm like, I watch this film and I'm like, my favorite scene is when they add it in later. So I don't know. And does that make the film itself worse because of it? Probably not.
No.
But
No.
I mean, it's, without that scene, I don't even know if I love it as much as I do already.
It is a little bit different to tag something great onto the end of a film than just to throw weird CGI characters that take up the entire frame.
But imagine a giant wampa in the middle of Sicily, though. I don't know. The Godfather Part II. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I have a couple more things real quick.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, because there are later season Walter White a kind of homage in the first Godfather. Because there's certain things where, picking off people one by one when you're at the top and you're just waiting for things to happen. And then also actually talking about the film here, Diane Keaton is even more sympathetic when she loses. And this, she also loses. She doesn't get the kids, and then they slam the door in her face.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's just slamming the door of the face. But instead, last time it was kind of we were seeing it from Diane's perspective or from Kay's perspective, where we're watching her and we watch the door close. Now we're seeing Michael slam it, and then we see it go on. Like we're no longer with Kay, we're with Michael fully, and it's like, oh, it's hard.
Like he can't even be in the same room with her. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, and that scene is so powerful too, where he just walks up and closes the door. I mean, there's so many great scenes, and I do agree with Chad. It's a little long, but I also think like the scenes that are great are like so good.
It's a film of considerable length, as Scorsese would say.
Considerable, yes. But let's consider this 6 for 11 Oscars. That's a lot. What it doesn't win, it wins 6 of 11. What it doesn't win, actor for Al Pacino, he does not win. Still does not win. Supporting actor, like I said, there were 3. One of them won, but the 2 that lost are Lee Strasberg and Michael Vigazzo. And then supporting actress Talia Shire, which is interesting because she was also in the first one, but she gets the nomination for the second one here, and she'll go on to get one for Rocky as well. Costume design, and then the ones it wins Best Picture, obviously. It wins Best Director for Francis Ford Coppola. He finally won that battle against Bob Fosse. Supporting actor for Robert De Niro. He is the one of the 3 that won, and it was his first before he would win again for Raging Bull, which we've also talked about. The 3 of us have talked about. It wins adapted screenplay. It wins original dramatic score and art direction. Man, this film, I mean, Michael Corleone, he sure is one big sucker, right? Sorry, that was my transition to Lenny. That was my preparation for the Lenny transition. It wasn't good. But imagine I said the word that cannot be said in Lenny when I was talking about Michael Corleone. Chad, tell us about Lenny, who is a big old sucker as well.
Sure. Lenny, directed by Bob Fosse, written by Julian Barry, cinematography by Bruce Surtees, music by Ralph Burns, starring Dustin Hoffman, Valerie Perrin, Jan Miner, Stanley Beck, and Gary Morton. Synopsis: Lenny Bruce pushes the boundaries of comedy obscenity laws as he struggles with a near God complex and self-destruction. Based on Lenny by Julian Barry.
Yeah. Dan, you look like you have something to say. Go ahead.
No, I figured you were going to say, Dan, had you seen this before?
Oh, yes. Had you seen it? Was this your first watch?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so this is the one. Yeah, so we were all watching this for the first time.
Yeah, I'm a huge Dustin Hoffman fan. And once again, unapologetically, I am a Dustin Hoffman. Say whatever the hell you want to say. I think this guy's one of the greatest actors to ever walk the earth. And Lenny was the one blank spot on my kind of filmography of Dustin Hoffman that I hadn't seen. And I'll tell you what, wow, does he just own this character? And I'm familiar with Lenny Bruce because I'm a big fan of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Yeah. So I kind of have an idea of what this person was. This really threw me for a loop, though, because he really was a nasty character, but he just didn't care about people. He didn't care about life. He didn't care about what you thought. He was just going to say whatever vomit was going to come out of his mouth, and he didn't care. But a lot of times it was right. The stuff was the funniest stuff. It's stuff like, hey, that's stuff that you think common sense stuff that someone's saying, but he couldn't say MF or and had the cops, and how many times he had to go to jail and all this stuff. And Valerie Perrin, or whatever, Perrin, she was fantastic in this. I'll tell you what, Dustin Hoffman, because I was like a massive fan of The Graduate going into this, and Serpico. No, that's Al Pacino. My bad. Rain Man. And Marathon Man is what I meant to say. Marathon Man and some of these films, and All the President's Men. But I hadn't seen this, and I'm like, dang it, why haven't I watched this? And if it wasn't for this, I probably wouldn't have watched it. But now I'm just glad I did, because Hoffman just kind of does something that he's never done in his entire career, and that's what I'm glad to see. He went there to that like crazy level. And of course he gets nominated for Best Actor for this, but and the black and white, I love the black and white in there, and hey, I love Bob Fosse. I love Cabaret. But Bob, he didn't deserve to win this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, he won the first one, so I don't think they were going to give him a second one over Coppola. But Chad, this was your first watch. Where do you come from in terms of Lenny Bruce knowledge? Are you a Bruce fan, or not a Bruce Springsteen fan, a Lenny Bruce fan? Do you know anything about?
I'm a big like stand-up comedy fan. There's so many comedians that I adore, and there's some that I don't. I think Lenny Bruce, like if I were to have listened to his comedy outside of this movie, I probably wouldn't have been a fan, just because like my style of comedy is not necessarily the shock humor, the I'm gonna say what that, like, I respect that, but it's not like my style. Like I don't like Lewis Black. I don't like, I'm trying to like think of all the ones that
Dice.
are like
Dice.
sure, yeah, I don't like
Dice.
that comedian really either.
Chappelle.
What Chappelle?
Chappelle.
Yeah.
I love Chappelle.
Oh, okay.
But like a lot of the ones that are like cursing is the big thing. But I will say, I really dug this movie just because I like that he was kind of like a pioneer of facing these big obscenity laws and what you can and can't say. And
Freedom of
you
speech.
have people in comedy today facing stuff like this, not the exact same thing, but they're facing the whole feared cancellation if you say something against a certain class of people, against a certain thing. But it's like look, you may not agree with what I say in this comedy special, but this is the format. This is the, like, really one of the only times that I can say whatever I want and it should be just okay. It's like a Comedy Central roast. It's like the certain things where this is the platform, this is the the little box where I can say whatever I want and it's comedy. I'm not always truthful. I'm not always saying the things that are as politically correct or whatever, but it's truthful. Now there are exceptions, because you have Kramer from Seinfeld. That was not okay what he did. So you have exceptions where there's certain things you can't just berate an audience yelling a slur at them. And Lenny Bruce did do that in this movie. And in real life, I'm sure.
Yes.
But where it's different is he started out that way and he turned it into the bit and he got people on his side. Like, no, stay with me. This is where I was going with it. I still didn't like that bit, and I didn't really like any of his bits. I didn't think any of his comedy was funny personally. Like, I was like, this all also seems kind of like old style comedy that really wouldn't fly with me. Like, even if Bill Cosby had not had all the stuff happen with Bill Cosby come out, I still would probably not have been a big stand-up comedy Bill Cosby fan. There are exceptions. I like Jerry Seinfeld. I like, certain stuff like that, where it's a little bit more minimalist comedy and people who are like, kind of like a one-liner comedy, like Stephen Wright and stuff like that. But, despite my personal taste on comedy, even though I don't think like a lot of that stuff is funny that he was saying specifically, I love that this movie was like, this is a man who pushed the boundaries, kind of won, but then kind of lost. And his life didn't go great, but he did a lot for comedy and for people, free speech, and people being able to say whatever they want to say, like on a platform like that. And a lot of comedians today have benefited from that. And I think that's pretty great. And I agree with Dan that Dustin Hoffman was fantastic in the movie. Yes.
We forget this took place in the 60s. He was doing this in the 60s where we hadn't gotten to the 70s. Yeah, the movie came out in the 70s, but we hadn't gotten to the 70s yet. This kind of stuff was no bueno in the 60s.
True.
70s, he probably could have got away with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and that's one thing also, is just like when this movie came out, it already probably felt dated, because by then it's like people can say whatever. Like watching it now, you're like, I'll just say it. I bleeped it out earlier, but saying cocksucker is not a big deal nowadays. Like you can say cocksucker all you want. I mean, Donald Sutherland delivers a great one in what's the show with Nicole Kidman and Hugh Grant? The not the fall, something.
Oh,
I'm forgetting the name of it, but he has a great monologue where he ends it with saying like, I'm an old fashioned cocksucker, and it's like this great little like line delivery. I'm like, and back then that doesn't fly. Which is so yes. I think. Wait,
I mean,
no.
right? He said MFer a lot. You can,
Yeah,
I mean,
motherfucker.
back,
Well, yeah.
you couldn't
Yeah,
say
I'm
MFer nowadays. This, I mean, you look at any movie now, and they're dealing with certain rating systems and stuff, Dylan. You can have certain amount of swear words in a movie.
The Undoing is the show I was looking for.
That's
Sorry.
it. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, have you? Real quick, have any of you guys seen The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel?
Yes.
Not yet.
Well,
All
this
right,
was.
'cause
I haven't talked yet about Lenny Bruce, but yes, I was introduced to Lenny Bruce from that, seeing
Okay.
him as like not a mentor figure to Maisel, but like or Midge, but like kind of like a comrade, like another person who was on the rise. Because that whole show deals with a woman who is trying her best to kind of bring reality and like why should comedy have to stray from how we actually talk and how we actually interact? And her whole thing was that she brought her real life marital problems and she would just talk about them. She wasn't even planning jokes. She would just literally talk about her marital problems. And because she's a funny person, everyone else ate it up. And this is kind of a similar deal where he's bringing his real life to the stage. And I haven't really talked about this movie yet, but this is what Fosse does so freaking well, is that he knows how to bring a person's real life onto the stage and bring the stage into the real life, and how they're a lot more similar than we are led to believe. We are led to believe that what happens on stage, what happens in real life happens on real life. But Fosse, the artist, knows that a lot of stuff in your real life translates to stage, just like a lot of stuff from your showbiz life can translate to the person you are in real life. It's exactly what he said about Cabaret. And is he kind of retreading the same thing, except instead of singing, it's comedy? Yes, but do I care because it's so freaking well done and so masterfully edited and put together? Not at all. And I think that's what's so brilliant.
And the fact that it's also about, just like Cabaret, about pushing the boundaries and kind of like, doing the thing that like is taboo, is not the thing that people would normally expect, and yet he's saying this is okay, which I think is great.
And I actually went back and watched some Lenny Bruce stuff, and this was my one thing too, Chad, is I agreed. I was like, this isn't funny. Like, I think the whole point of the movie is to show that he wasn't really that funny. He was just known and remembered because he was volatile. And I think Fosse's much more interested in his life and who he was as a person rather than how he was as a comedian. But the one thing I'll ding the film for is that watching his actual comedy, he is so much funnier than this film leads you to believe. And I've actually heard, now watching this as a film, I love the film, but as an actual depiction of how Lenny Bruce was as a comedian, I think this film is not very good in showing exactly how he was as a comedian. But I don't think the film is trying to be that, so I think it's okay. Like, the film is not trying to show an exact replication of how he sounded. This isn't Bohemian Rhapsody where we want to give you exactly what Freddie Mercury sounded like. It's like, no, this is to show more than just who he is. This is more to show how his life came to the stage and how it overwhelmed him and how he went into his own spiraling, similar to how Bob Fosse himself did. I mean, the fact that literally he's as he's doing this, some background here, as he's making this movie, he's also choreographing the original Chicago on Broadway. And right after he does both this and Chicago on Broadway, he has a heart attack and almost dies. And he does survive that heart attack, but this is the project that literally led him to his heart attack. Now, also part of that reason is that he was having his own marital issues. He was also a chain smoker, and he was a big drug addict. And that is also kind of where Lenny Bruce is too. Coincidence? I think not. And another thing on top of that is that he is also, working with Dustin Hoffman, who, like kind of Dan alluded to, you love him or hate him, you love him as an actor. Everyone loves Dustin Hoffman as an actor, but as a person, I've not heard a single person who has worked on a film with Dustin Hoffman say they had a positive experience. Not because of any like inappropriate stuff, and I'm sure there has been, but like just because he's a pain in the ass to work with, kind of like what we talked about with Marlon Brando. I heard he's the absolute hardest to work with, to where like famous directors have famously Ivan Reitman, who has sadly passed away, but when he was doing the film Draft Day, just kind of throwaway dad flick about sports, was doing Draft Day, he had the opportunity to get Dustin Hoffman for one of the roles, and he turned it down because he just was like, life's too short to work with Dustin Hoffman.
It's like Bruce
Willis. I really think it's one of those cases where working on a film about a polarizing figure, trying to make the audience very aware that they are a polarizing figure, while also being a polarizing director and choreographing a show on Broadway about polarizing figures, Chicago, while also dealing with a polarizing actor. That is a recipe for disaster, and I can totally see why Fosse himself had a heart attack after this, because he's taking on so much and trying to say so much, and it seems like this is kind of his whole crazy persona personified on stage. I think I'm watching more Fosse than I'm watching Lenny Bruce. And I think that's a good thing. I think for cinema, it doesn't have to be an ideal representation of who the artist is. Now, watching back some Lenny Bruce comedy, I'm like, wow, Dustin Hoffman, I think it's a great performance, but is it a great Lenny Bruce impersonation or like a great Lenny Bruce? I don't think he's doing a great Lenny Bruce. I think he's just doing a good performance as a struggling comedian. I think he's doing a bad Lenny Bruce in the fact that I don't think the jokes land, but I don't think they're necessarily supposed to. I think it's supposed to be in the context of this film very different than what it is in real life. And I've listened to a lot of comedians specifically talk about this film and they hate it because they think Dustin Hoffman is terrible at the comedy of it. But I think this film is a drama. It's not a comedy. If this was about, oh my God, how funny is Lenny Bruce, they would have probably gotten a different actor, because a lot of the comedians have said that the thing they don't like is that after Dustin Hoffman will deliver a joke, he kind of gives a little smile, like kind of like winking at the audience. That's something Lenny Bruce never did. Lenny Bruce was very much like your Norm Macdonald. He never really went to the audience to look and see if they were laughing. He would just kind of say it, and if it didn't work, he'd move on to the next one. He didn't give a shit. And I think that's the difference here, is that Dustin Hoffman's playing it a little bit more, I don't know the word for it, but he's a little bit more kind of giddy in a way Lenny Bruce wasn't. But I think for this film, that works a lot, because it's not about how good he is as a comedian. It's about the things he said and how that kind of destructed his own life. And we haven't even talked about Valerie Perrine yet, who is Lex Luthor's sidekick in Superman, who is just amazing here. And I can't believe she got pigeonholed to just be kind of like the ditzy sidekick after so many years. I love her in the Superman movie, so it was exciting to see her in this. But I think that stuff is also so helpful, framing it as this documentary and having her talk about it. You know, you get a lot of the drama there because you realize how destructive Lenny was, even in trying so hard to do something that inherently feels right, you know, freedom of speech, but doing it in a way that he pushed himself to literally death. I mean, the final shot, we're going to the cynicism again of Gene Hackman sitting in his apartment in the conversation in Chinatown, like the bleak ending of him lying on the bathroom floor dead. Like that is what Lenny did. But I think the film really wants to show the destruction of the artist. And I think Fosse himself is so interested in telling that downfall of the artist. And All That Jazz is about Fosse making Lenny. So I'm very interested to watch All That Jazz to see Roy Scheider play a version of Fosse doing this. Like it's very interesting because it kind of covers this point in Fosse's life, because this was a very stressful part of Fosse's life, and you can see it. Like this film is stressful, but I think it's a good type of stressful where I'm always leaning in. And I think whoever he has, I forget what name you said, Chad, but whoever he had to edit those films for him, Alan Heim just killed it, because he also won the Academy Award for editing All That Jazz. I think Alan Heim deserves a lot of credit of how he edits everything from the stage to the real life stuff. It's like Cabaret. He seamlessly bounces back and forth so well. I'm obsessed with Fosse's direction. He's one of my favorite filmmakers to watch. I'm just obsessed. I'm obsessed.
Well, what's his face too, Dylan, is a method actor. I wanted to tell you that Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah.
So notoriously method actors are hard to work with.
Yeah.
So not excusing any behavior on set, but method actors, we all know, we've seen the clip of Christian Bale, you know, and you know, so Joaquin Phoenix is kind of not the best guy to work with. So you have to kind of preface that when you say he's going to become these people, he's going to act like these people off screen. So if Lenny Bruce wasn't necessarily the nicest guy, you know, so maybe
that's why I think it works so well.
Off scene or whatever. I don't know, you know, but and the other thing is it radio that they call them shock jocks, or is that a kind of a parallel to shock comedians? What's the word with these comedians? Like what was the guy who used to yell, scream all the time? Long hair.
Sam Kinison?
Sam Kinison. He's kind of like shocking comedians.
Shock humor,
Shock humor. Which, you know, they paralleled that into shock jocks, where you're radio personalities, but you say the most obnoxious thing like Howard Stern or something that's going to get a lot of, and sometimes people get fired. The one guy said something about a girls' basketball team. They had blah, blah, blah hair, and boom, next day he was gone. You know, so these guys, this spawned that shock humor comedian over the years after that, you know, and there was a lot of them that cropped up in the 80s after that. So 70s and 80s. Rodney Dangerfield, maybe he was a little bit less, but he could really, he could needle you pretty good, you know. But Richard Pryor is another one.
Yeah.
You know, so if you look at these films, just, you know, this is another one that kind of, you think, oh, okay, Lenny Bruce, he was a forerunner of this or that or the other. Now that we see, that seems like an obvious thing now, you know, the Howard Sterns and the Don Imuses and the Kinnisons and people like that. But that's why he had the cops on the corners of the stage every time somebody said one of those curse words or one of those derogatory comments or something.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Dan. You actually kind of remind me of something here. It's like, you know, Lenny Bruce as a comedian, you know, maybe getting the cops mad at him, maybe getting, you know, the crowd mad at him and stuff like that. That's a legitimate form of comedy, you know, even though it might skirt the line of like being problematic and stuff. But if you look at like, even over in rock music, someone like, you know, Iggy Pop, who used to like literally just go and just like antagonize the audience and like spit on them and stuff like that. And you're like, that's fucking like crazy like, rock music right there. But you look at how hardcore something like that is, and then you look at like something like Green Day, which they're great in their own right, but you're like, it's nowhere near the level of like the Stooges and stuff like that. So I look at that like comedy and that it's like kind of like, you know, an evolving thing where some people are like a little cleaner, and then some people are like really like they'll antagonize the audience, which I think is like really crazy. But like some people might love that type of show and want to go see that type of comedy, or even when it just kind of like attacks you, like, you know, and you're not even expecting it, you know, maybe you might love it, maybe you might not hate it, but maybe you might hate it, but you will still, it's still a legitimate art form that, you know, it pushes the boundaries and like pushes comedy itself forward. And then
Andy Kaufman. Remember Andy Kaufman, guys? We all saw Man on the Moon. Oh, Andy Kaufman's another one that just like.
When we cover 1999, I want to elect to substitute the Best Picture winner for Man on the Moon, so we can just talk about Man on the Moon because I love it so much.
Sorry,
I disagree here. I think.
All right, Chad. But like,
but talking because you mentioned Andy Kaufman, like that's another like kind of like avant-garde, like, you know, is he joking? I don't know. Is he joking?
He's like wrestling people. Yeah.
The stuff between him and that wrestler guy on the talk show, and you're like, he's just like,
I love it.
It's just a giant bit, but like at the time, you're like, who is this guy? What is he doing? And it's just like, and then now you have people like Tim Heidecker who's doing like very similar stuff, and you're like, I don't even know if they're joking, but they're comedian. I don't know. And it's just like a whole kind of like, you know,
out of like Isla Schlesinger. These women are just picking out guys in the, you're a fat slob. And they're these like gorgeous blonde women. It's like, dang it, man, they got a trashy mouth, these women. But they're a spawn. They're spawned off of all that shock comedian thing, you know.
And another big shock comedian, like newer, that I want to mention is Anthony Jeselnik.
Yes, I love him.
He's one of my favorite comedians of all time.
Shark Party, baby.
Because he's a nice guy in real life, but like his persona, he acts like he's the greatest comedian of all time, that he's smarter than you are, and he just like says the most horrendous, crazy jokes that you've ever heard, but about everyone. It's just about anyone and everyone. And that's why it's kind of like South Park in a way, where it's like, no, we're going to make fun of everyone. So nothing is off the table. Yeah. And, you know, that's how it is. I did also want to touch on stuff that Dylan was saying about, you know, Bob Fosse and just how special it is that Bob himself created this movie, that no one else could have made this movie because he put so much of himself in it. I think is fantastic. And I think that's might be why a legitimate like Lenny Bruce stan who goes like, that's not my Lenny Bruce, hashtag not my Lenny Bruce. You know, they'll look into it and they won't see the guy that they know and loved. But Bob putting himself in this movie, I could see why the character would kind of get like blended a little bit, where it's a little bit of Bob, a little bit of Lenny Bruce, a little bit of Dustin Hoffman, and it just becomes a character and not Lenny Bruce himself. But the themes of the film are still intact.
Yeah.
And I think that Dylan put that really great too. So I just wanted to second that. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, I don't think Fosse is at all interested in the comedy. I think he's solely interested in the person, and I think it shows. And I honestly think if they were to get someone like a real comedian who actually could perform the Lenny Bruce comedy correctly and like actually make it as funny as it actually was, I think it would take away from the message of the film. I think people would leave it being like, wow, he was a funny son of a gun, not, oh my God, what a tragic figure, what a like, wow, that is someone's life, that is deep shit. And I think you get the, oh shit, that's deep shit stuff because the comedy itself isn't as distracting. Even though Cabaret, the songs are really amazing and we still get the point, but again, like I don't think the comedy has to be 100% accurate, and I think it's almost more fitting for the narrative to have someone who is not inherently a comedian trying and really embodying the person of Lenny Bruce, but not necessarily embodying the comedic stage point, because it kind of makes it a little fictional. It kind of gives it a little bit of a fictional sheen over it, which I kind of like. I like that. Yeah,
I totally agree with you. And now that because you've agreed with me about like the comedy in the movie not being really that funny, I thought maybe it was just me, and it's like, well, that's not my style of comedy.
No.
But now I kind of want to check out more Lenny Bruce, because like I said, you said Lenny Bruce is funny, and you also love Anthony Jeselnik. I think maybe Lenny Bruce could be my thing, just not in the movie.
Yeah.
Outside of the movie, maybe.
And I don't think that takes away from Dustin's performance either. I mean, I think
Definitely not.
if he's going for an exact replication, I think he did a bad job, but he's not. He's going for his own version, and I think it works. I don't think he's very funny, but this Lenny is not, which I think is just so interesting.
Because it could also just be about like, timing. Like timing is a huge part of comedy. Like maybe Lenny just had that just his delivery, and just Dustin couldn't like get that, but yet like you said, it doesn't really matter.
And Fosse himself is not a comedian, so he doesn't know how to direct that either. He only knows how to direct the tragic artist, and that's exactly what he does here. He doesn't know how to direct perfect comedy because he didn't know Lenny personally, I don't think. So like he's solely here because he's interested in the downfall of an artist first and foremost, and it shows.
I agree with you, except I still think Two Ladies is very, very funny. So
right, true. Yeah, but that could be Joel Grey being a good comedian more so than
true.
I mean,
Very
who
true.
knows? Who really knows? So Lenny also doesn't win an Oscar. Nominated for 6 of them though. It's nominated for Best Picture, Best Director for Bob Fosse, who loses to Coppola in the rematch, and they will rematch again when they compete for Apocalypse Now versus All That Jazz.
Oh shit!
Another time. Best Actor for Dustin Hoffman, Best Actress for Valerie Perrine, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Cinematography. And I wanted to say, because Chad kind of alluded to roasts earlier, if we hit 1,000 subscriptions on this channel, on this subathon, there will be a Roast of Dill hosted by Kelsey Kilpatrick of Marvelous Movie Mondays, and her and all the hosts will be roasting me, and I cannot wait for it. I already have Zach and Matt are already very excited about it. I'm sure Chad's very excited about it too.
It's a bit they are.
Yeah. Speaking of roasts, let's talk about a tower on fire. Let's talk.
I knew you were going there.
I know. I had to. I had to. And it wasn't even planned. I had so many other segues planned, but I was going to say like, oh, Fosse's such a towering persona. No, this was a better one. So speaking of roast, let's talk about Towering Inferno. Chad, tell us about it.
Yeah, sure. The Towering Inferno, directed by John Guillermin, written by Sterling Siliphant, cinematography by Fred J. Cohenkamp, and music by, I know this one, the great John Williams, starring Steve McQueen, Paul Newman, William Holden, Faye Dunaway, Fred Astaire, Susan Blakely, Richard Chamberlain, Jennifer Jones, O.J. Simpson, Robert Vaughn, and Robert Wagner. Synopsis: a disaster film about a burning building and the people trapped inside, based on The Tower by Richard Martin Stern and The Glass Inferno by Thomas N. Scordia and Frank M. Robinson.
Wow, they literally just combined the titles there.
Yeah, right?
So this was also a first watch for me and Chad. Dan, was this a first watch for you or no?
Yeah, well, I think I'd seen this when I was a lot younger, and I just don't remember seeing it. I do remember seeing it, but I don't remember seeing it, because when you're a little kid, you just things just go out of your mind.
Well,
I'm 15 years later, it's hard,
Also, this film, I feel like, you've seen Die Hard, you've seen kind of a better version of it.
Yeah,
You've seen Titanic,
yes.
you've seen this on a
Yeah.
ship, you've seen the
Oh,
Poseidon
yes.
Adventure, you've seen this on a boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a disaster film. Like you've seen this film. It's just maybe not this film.
Yeah.
But yeah.
My thing is this, Dylan. Look, you live in a big city. You're used to being in big buildings.
Yes.
I have vertigo. So these scenes when they're looking, these buildings, like that Chicago, I don't know if you guys have been to Chicago or not.
Yes.
No.
They have that building where you sit on that glass, whatever the hell that deck. I literally would die if I had to go out on that deck. I mean, I wouldn't even think about going out on that deck because I would literally feel like I'm going to die. This building, you're like, okay, look, you got these apartments, you got this thing, you got this party going on, you got all this stuff. And then you're like, these guys are taking shortcuts on the wiring, and they weren't putting the right coating around the wires. So then the wires get caught and they put chemical. I was like, God, this day and age, this reminds me of shoddy gangster construction companies and all this kind of like, oh, we're on strike. So the guys are sitting on the tractor. Oh, it ain't moving because we're on strike. Oh, they settled the strike. All right, get back to work. And this, it's like, come on, man. I mean, this is just like ridiculous. This day and age, you just like, you couldn't get away with this stuff nowadays. I mean, every building would be falling down. Look, I know this is a movie, so they had to find a way to kind of have the building get on fire, and then just the stuff like I don't know who it was, Robert Wagner. He's in the apartment having sex with his secretary, and then he's like, "All right, I'm gonna make a run for it. I'll put a towel on me," and he gets burnt on fire, and she's like, "What the hell am I? I'll just jump out the window and I'm dead." The deaths, and this craziness. But the people that have a conscience, Paul Newman and Steve McQueen, they're like, what the hell is wrong with these people? And they're doing everything they can to try to save this building. And it's just like the stairs fall down and they're stuck in the thing. It's like, come on, Billy, come on down here. I forget what the Brady Bunch kid. Come on, get over here. I'm afraid. I mean, oh my God. Then Fred Astaire's in there. His old lady's stuck in
what a random, like when I saw his name on the thing, I was like, wait, Fred Astaire? And I was like, oh, they better have him dance. And he does for like 20 seconds. He does a little dance when they're in the party. Him and Jennifer Jones, famously my best actress for 1944, I think, the same year as Double Indemnity for Since You Went Away. She's the one who runs after the train like an airplane. She's the original one who did that, where she's running after the train.
One thing real quick, Dylan, but I know I want to give you guys your turns, but when they say, hey, there's a fire in this room, we need to get the fire company here. Oh, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. You freaking moron. You complete idiot. There's a fire in your building. Get the fire company there. Get it over there. I mean, how stupid can these people be?
I agree. And I think your enjoyment of this film goes as far as how much you're willing to forgive the fact that it is inherently very stupid, in the fact that like all these characters are making all the wrong decisions. The only one who's making the right one is Steve McQueen. Even Paul Newman has his questionable times, but he eventually gets the light of day. But I think if you're willing to kind of accept that this is a ridiculous premise, like the fact that anyone would immediately not run crazy when there's a fire, but I think it as a PSA, it kind of works because it's like showing how not to behave in that circumstance, to where I bet if you're watching this in like a elementary school, you will never, ever think twice when it comes to fires. You know what I mean? And maybe it's effective. I think just as us as grown adults who have common sense, we're looking at this like, they can't be that dumb. But some corporate people are that, blinded by money and fame and the beauty of having this lush party that maybe there are people who would just say, we're on a higher floor. It won't get us. It won't get us. And I know in a post 9/11 world too, it's hard to imagine anyone thinking that. But I mean, it's a very different time. Like you said, with the 70s, like it's a very different time. And I think this is a very interesting look at how society looked at certain things that I think nowadays look at completely differently. But Chad, what were your thoughts on this one, Towering Inferno?
I didn't really like this movie at all.
Mm.
However, I kind of want to rewatch this movie with the Dan Skip Allen commentary if I can, because that would be a delight and hilarious. Absolutely.
These people are dumb, Chad. I mean, they're stupid.
Yeah,
I mean, Steve McQueen, you're like, what is wrong with these people, right, Chad? It's like,
right.
Steve McQueen's the only one with a freaking. Paul Newman's trying to tell him there's a mistake. He goes after the son-in-law, like, you fucking idiot. Why'd you redesign my designs? Why didn't you put the coating over the wires and all this stuff? It's like, God, idiots.
Yeah.
To cut costs, because money is what controls everything.
Agreed.
I think that's a valuable thing to say, even though it's very clearly exaggerated, let's say.
Go ahead. Sorry, Chad. I apologize.
That's okay, man. I mean, and then it's just funny because like Dylan's down there trying to save it, like, hey, it's kind of a PSA, like against what not to do. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't see, like, especially we started this whole episode out with like, look at all the great films in this year that could have been nominated. Like Blazing Saddles, like, is just like one of the like greatest comedies of all time, arguably. That could have been something like for like comedy and stuff. And like, I understand because I love a good disaster film when it's good. And I'm not even saying like this is one of the first ones, but it's not the first one. Like there was a better one that came out 2 years before, The Poseidon Adventure.
Same director, same writer, almost everybody. I apologize, Chad. I'm not trying to do this perfect. But did you watch all the special features on this thing?
Not yet.
I watched all of them. Oh my God. Amazing special features on the making and how they got to the various scenes and then the screenwriter and all. Wow, that Blu-ray is packed with a whole laundry list of special features. It really gives you a new kind of appreciation for the movie and what they did. And Irwin Allen, my namesake, Allen. So go back, Chad. I apologize.
Sure. I mean, and I will say, like, this movie is not like trash. I'm not trying to say that. There's craft there. It's a big disaster movie about a burning building, a lot of people, and stuff like that. Sure. I just wouldn't put it as like a best picture material personally. And like Dylan said it perfectly when we started talking about this movie, is that you've seen this movie way better in other things. Like this got nominated. Why the hell didn't Die Hard? That's one of the greatest movies ever made, in my opinion. Right. That should have gotten nominated there. And I looked and I was like, that slate's not even as good as this one. So,
and I'll tell you why, because Bruce Willis is not the Bruce Willis we know today. Alan Rickman, not a name. Here, you've got Paul Newman and you got Fred Astaire, Jennifer Jones, like all these old like classic faces. And it reminds me of, and I know you love this film, Chad, but it reminds me of like a Don't Look Up, where it's like, if it was a different group, if it was all unknown actors, would this be getting nominated? Would it? And I know you love the film, but is it a top 10 movie of the year if Leo, Meryl Streep, Jennifer Lawrence, if they're not in it? I don't know. It might be for some. It still might make it, but I think having a star-studded cast really goes a long way in a film like this, whereas like Blazing Saddles, you have like some famous stars, but like this one is just laden with them. But I don't think that's an excuse to get nominated. I also wouldn't have nominated this. This is also the one of the crop, and I know tipping my ranking, but this is the one of the crop that I was not a mega fan of, but I still think when I average them all out, it's still my highest ranking year. Like I still ranked it high enough to where like because in my mind, I was able to kind of separate the seriousness of it and kind of just like enjoy it as this kind of like silly disaster movie. And honestly, at times I was watching this, like when I prepare for a movie with Framerec with Matt Chapman, I look at a movie a certain way where I'm looking for funny, corny dialogue. I'm looking for ridiculousness things. In this film, there were points where I felt like I was preparing for an episode of Framerec because I was looking at some of the dialogue because it's so cheesy, it's so hokey. Some of the banter does not feel real in the way they talk to one another. But I think when I'm looking at it as like I'm looking at this as a cheesy camp disaster film, I'm enjoying it more than if I was looking at it as a prestige picture like Titanic, where like it's supposed to be this epic film, this glorious art piece, which is also a disaster film. Here, I was just kind of like, I'm going to turn off my brain. That being said, if it's going to be a film like that, it needs to be 90 minutes tops, get in and out. You know, it does not need to be 3 hours.
It's so long. I mean, it's like 2 hours 40 minutes, but still, like I mean, I could see. I mean, look, Titanic's long as fuck, but it earns it.
Yeah.
Here it doesn't, because it's just like the same shit over and over, and you don't really care about any of the people. You're kind of making fun of them, like you were saying, and like Dan was saying. Yeah, maybe if you watch, because I didn't watch this as fun disaster movie. I watched the Poseidon Adventure as that, because that wasn't nominated. So, which I actually think that could have been a great nomination, because I actually think there's some deep stuff in the Poseidon Adventure that's with great character moments and character stuff.
Once you put it on this pedestal of Best Picture, you're looking at it in a different lens. Like, they would never nominate a camp film in Best Picture.
Yeah, like I would have, if someone said, Chad, this did not get nominated, The Towering Inferno, for anything, but check this out. This is a really fun little disaster movie that kind of inspired other things, because you do see like little bits of stuff, like the building. It's not on fire really in Die Hard, but it's like a building and people are trapped in it and they're trying, so you do see a lot of like, stuff. And then like with the whole women and children on the elevator, I'm like, Titanic.
Yeah. It even reminded me a little of Spider-Man with the trolley car when they're dangling over. It's kind of like setting that groundwork. Yeah. But
and it's
I
just
agree
like
with you.
You see little elements that are in movies that you love way more than you would ever probably love The Towering Inferno. But yeah, it's just, for me, I think it sucks that this one got in, other than like something like Blazing Saddles or Young Frankenstein, or the other great ones that you guys mentioned that I haven't seen, like the one of the first Scorsese movies or whatever. Like, it just wasn't like at the Scorsese we know today. So,
Alice Doesn't Live Here is fantastic. I'm telling you right now. You ever watch?
I can't wait to see it.
You ever watch?
She won Best Actress,
Alice?
right? Ellen Burstyn.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
You ever watch Alice? The sitcom Alice? That's what it was based on. Alice Doesn't Live Here anymore.
Oh,
is it a comedy?
Mel's Diner. Remember Mel's? Yeah, it's a comedy. It's Mel's Diner, and Alice worked in Mel's Diner, and the guy in Mel's Diner is in there, and it's not going off. I'm sorry, going off on that, but yeah. Oh, Alice Doesn't Live Here anymore is fantastic. Young Jodie Foster, very young Jodie Foster. She almost looks like a boy in there. But no, I wanted to something that people look at today. Okay, this movie should be nominated for Best Picture because it's going to get in Best Sound, Best Editing, Best Cinematography, Best Score, this blah blah. So that should qualify it for Best Picture. Well, my thing is this: maybe The Towering Inferno got in here for Best Picture because it had all those other prerequisites of Best Editing, Best Visual Effects, Best this, Best that.
Because the craft is good. The actual effects look really good. Yeah.
So it had a bunch of below the line things, and that was like, it's in here, it's in there, it's in there. So let's boom. There's 6 of those nominations. Boom, you're in now Best Picture because all those craft types of things. And maybe this is how this stuff started happening as years gone by, Chad. I don't know. I'm just
saying, because now we're kind of mirroring this. We might get in the same conversation when we discuss Avatar: The Way of Water coming up, because it's like it's the big technical movie, but the discussion would then be, I know Dylan has his thoughts. The discussion would then be, does the story match that? And I can't wait to rewatch that movie just to see if it does for me. But it's one of those things where it's like The Towering Inferno. I could see exactly what Dan's saying right now, back in the 70s, playing out 50 years later again, maybe.
Top Gun too, but that's another whole.
I don't know about that. It's screenplay nomination.
Top Gun's visual effects are way more like unnoticeable, though. It feels more practical than like Avatar, which is very obviously. But that's another discussion for another time. This one, though, I see what you mean, Dan. Like, it's going to get all those technical nominations for all the effects, and maybe they just saw this as an achievement, story aside. But again, like when you're looking at Best Picture, though, you have to encompass everything. Like, I think the strongest parts of Chinatown and Lenny, well, not Lenny, but Chinatown conversation is probably its screenplays. But I still think the other elements bring it to life really well. Lenny, the best stuff is the direction, but it doesn't mean the story's not great. Here, it's like the story is not great. the direction and like design is. It's just like they seem to prioritize one over the other. But I still think, because I'm definitely the highest on it of the three of us, like I still enjoyed myself watching this. I think
I
when
did too.
when it's working, it's really working. Like I think like a lot of the action set pieces are really cool, like the elevator when they have to kind of like zip line the back and forth individually, like that stuff is cool. That reminded me of like Spider-Man, Die Hard stuff. It's just like as a whole, like it's just too long, and
Very
I do
long.
think some of the stars not underutilized, but I definitely think they were there to be stars. Like, do we care as much about Fred Astaire and Jennifer Jones if they're not Fred Astaire and Jennifer Jones? I don't
Right.
know. And Fred Astaire is the one who gets nominated for this, and he wins, I think, I want to say Golden Globe and BAFTA for this for supporting actor. Like he was winning over Robert De Niro for a lot of awards. And I think
Wow.
it's because he's this veteran that people love. And, you know, seeing the OG Hollywood song and dance man, it's like Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire, like those are your two. And like, it'd be like seeing Gene Kelly in a movie like this, where you're like, oh my God, that's my favorite star from when I was a kid. He's now like this old man who loves this older woman, and at the end he's getting this cat. And I figured Chad would like that moment where Jennifer Jones's cat finally, and he has a little moment with him. I'm like,
Well,
oh,
the
that's
other
cute.
The
thing
cats
too,
survived.
is-
That's amazing.
Yes, I think that moment. Maybe everyone is Chad, and they were watching this movie, and they were like, "Oh, but Fred Astaire and the cat," and nominated him because I don't think he's the highlight of this movie. I think the highlight is the Steve McQueen, because he's doing Steve McQueen. He's the action hero, kind of coming and doing the thing. Looks really cool doing it. Paul Newman looks really cool doing it. Like those two, I think because they're solid, I think the movie is sturdy
Yeah.
enough.
He should have jumped a motorcycle over something at some point.
Oh
Well,
my
the
God,
budget,
imagine
guys.
that I would have thrown 5 stars at.
The thing
That's
is, you
Fast and
gotta
Furious.
you gotta justify this budget. So, you get all these. If you look at these big films with like 10 actors in them, you're like, oh my God, this one's in it, that one's in it, this one's in it. Well, how do you get? You get these big name actors because that's going to draw people to come to your movie, and then that's going to justify that big budget, which that thing had to have a huge, massive budget for the time. I don't know what the budget was for the time, but I'm sure it was a lot for the 70s. But you get these big names, that's going to get the people to come through it. You got the name, the Towering Inferno, and then the commercials and the trailers and stuff. It's a whole game that they were playing, It's just, and maybe it was just at that time, it was just kind of like a giant, like bigger than life situation type of thing, like a Jaws type of situation, where it was people were lined up around the block and it's just, yeah, there's burning building and people running for their lives and
well, it's a much more crowd please. Like if you're gonna put these 5 movies in theaters, I guarantee this one sells the most money. If Godfather 1 doesn't exist, like Godfather being as successful as it was, I can see why people were buying tickets to the second one. But let's say the other 4 films, if you put the words Chinatown, Lenny, Conversation, Towering Inferno on a marquee, people are probably gonna pick the one about the burning building just because it's the more appealing one, and maybe that's why. I don't know.
Look at the budget. Somebody look up that budget. Tell me that the budget and then how much it made. I'll put money on it that it probably made more.
$14 million, made $203 million.
See?
So, yeah, crazy. Really made over 10 times his budget, which is nuts. Any words on OJ? We haven't talked about him.
He's actually good in the movie.
I didn't think he was the worst part.
Type of character.
I almost forgot. I saw his name in the opening credits, and Chad had told me ahead of time that he was in it. Because I didn't know anything about this film. I saw Inferno, and I thought this was about a volcano.
Yeah.
And so when I was watching this, I was like, oh, it's about a building. And then I forgot about OJ. And then when I was like, oh, wait, who's this guy? He's really good. And I was like, oh, wait, that's OJ. Yeah, no comment. Anything else?
I mean, the OJ thing, it's just one of those when he pops up in like, Naked Guns and stuff like that. And you're just like, yeah, he used to be like a legitimate actor. But then you just kind of like roll your eyes and go, oh, Jesus.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, very, very interesting figures. We're talking about, Lenny Bruce. We're talking about Roman Polanski. We're talking about OJ. I mean, this is a deep episode. Towering Inferno, though, like Dan said, up for a lot of text. It's nominated for 8 Oscars, which is more than Lenny, which is more than The Conversation. So it's third to Godfather and Chinatown, which both have 11, but it's nominated for 8. It wins 3. So it actually wins more than Chinatown. It wins more than the others, except for Godfather Part II. It wins for Best Original Song, We May Never Love Like This Again, which is the one that they're singing at the party. And like they spent a long time of her just singing it. It's just literally the song for 2 minutes, but hey, I mean, they wanted that Oscar. It wins cinematography and it wins film editing. It beats Godfather for cinematography, Dan. I know you probably have words about that. Godfather 2 not even nominated for cinematography, believe it or not.
Wow.
And it's nominated. Oh, and it also wins film editing. And it's nominated for Best Picture, Best Supporting Actor for Fred Astaire, because that's the one they picked. Best Original Dramatic Score for John Williams. Best Sound and Best Art Direction. And that is it. That is 1974, folks. But before we go, we have to rank these things, and then we got to give out some acting prizes. So let's start it off. We might be in agreement. We'll see. But my number 5, we're ranking these 5 films, is Towering Inferno. Chad, what is your number 5?
Also, the Towering Inferno, of course.
All right, and Dan.
I had a different one going into this, but I'm actually going to agree with you guys and go with Towering Inferno.
All right,
your 4 will tell us what was there.
So my number 4, and like I said, these top 4, like probably one of the strongest quartets of films.
And I want to preface this by saying, if we did take, because I never got around to this, I would take the Towering Inferno out now after this whole conversation that we've been having, and I'd put Young Frankenstein in, because I believe Young Frankenstein is an absolute masterpiece, and I am shocked that, because sometimes when you're doing these, you forget what came out what years, and you look it up, it's like, what the heck? How did that get in there? And that did. Young Frankenstein, incredible, absolutely incredible.
Just don't tell me and Dylan's mutual friend Alan that, because he will disagree.
Oh yeah, Alan.
He's in there doing
Alan. I don't know if Alan's awake right now. I don't know what part of the subathon.
I know he watches, so I gave him a shout out.
But
singing
also
the Ritz, Dylan singing the Ritz. He's over there singing the Ritz.
It's also tough because, like, I'm thinking I would definitely take Towering Inferno out, but I'd probably replace it with Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3. I just love that film, and it feels like the good substitute for this film, because it's kind of like that. It's kind of like this disaster, a little less scale, but it's kind of a disaster flick. It's these hijackers on a train. It kind of has a vibe that's like the fire in the building.
I like how we each have like a different one. Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, Taking.
Well, that's another thing. I got to put Blazing Saddles in there too. I just don't know if I would take out my number 4 or 3. But again, like, I think any amount of films could replace the top. Like I think any films could be in this conversation. They're so good. Speaking of, my 4 is The Conversation. Chad, what is
my 4 is, and I was between these 2, but Lenny is my number 4.
Lenny is your number 4. All right, Dan, what is your number 4?
Lenny.
All right, and my number 3 is Lenny, which means, Chad, your number 3?
The Conversation.
All right, and Dan, what is your number 3?
The Conversation.
All right, so Chad and Dan have the same exact ranking. And
so far.
My number 2 is The Godfather Part II. Chad, what is your number 2?
What?
I'm sorry. Chad, what is your number 2?
I thought I was gonna be the only one. The Godfather Part 2 is also my number 2.
Wow. And Dan, what is your number 2?
We know what it is.
I'm speechless.
I'm sorry, Dan. Hey, Dan. I like I said, it's stacked.
I'm actually very surprised that Dylan did that, but he talked about what is his number 1 so highly with the screenplay, so I get it.
Yeah, my number 2 is Chinatown, and I love Chinatown. I absolutely love Chinatown, and I love. There's so much about Chinatown I love, but it doesn't even hold a candle to The Godfather Part II. I mean, it doesn't even come close.
So Dan, I'll let you say what is your number 1 then? Reveal.
The Godfather Part 2 is number 1. It should be everybody's number 1. This is one of the greatest films of all time. It's easily one of the top.
You said the same thing about Raging Bull.
Well, I believe it's one of my favorites of all time, because it really resonated with me.
Also,
you probably haven't lived with an abusive alcoholic father like I did when I was growing up as a kid. So
that's fair.
Raging Bull meant a lot more to me, and it reminded me of my father a lot. But that's another whole thing. We don't want to get into that again. But I just love the dichotomy of the kind of the soft-hearted Vito Corleone. He can't even get his name. He comes to Ellis Island. Oh, Andolini. No, where are you from? You're Corleone. He has no respect. Nobody respects him. And then when he gets rid of the shady boss, and then everybody, oh, you don't pay for that. Oh, here's your money. Oh, I didn't know who you were. Here's your money back. And I mean, and then you have this guy that's literally the epitome of the devil incarnate. And then you have these 2 kind of sides, and it's just like two two different sides of the same kind of coin in a lot of ways. The father and the son, and how the father got to where he is, and how the son got to where he is, and how, I mean, it took his wife to kill their child just so she could get back at him and make him just absolutely blow up and smack her in the face, and just his brother turned on him. I mean, how I don't understand.
Well, Dan, I will say this was the toughest I've had to decide between the top two. It's just, I think for me personally, I think because the first Godfather I preferred over the second one, and I already made that my winner of last month, I figured I'd give another spotlight. It's kind of like the Lord of the Rings thing with Chad. Like, he wanted to vary it up and give different winners.
I was just about to ask you, Dylan, was this a very, very similar situation to Lord of the Rings and In the Bedroom for you?
Yeah, a little bit, where like there's a film I just fell in love with immediately, but one that I've had so much more history with. And I'll say right now, my number one is Chinatown. I think it's because I think when I watched that, I said that's going to be one of my like top 10 films of all time. Like, I really do think it's that good. And any other year, Godfather Part 2 would be up in that conversation. And I would put the first Godfather over Chinatown if asked. Like, I would. Like, I still think the first Godfather's like probably my top 5 films of all time. Top five. So this is not a slight for the Godfather Part 2 at all, and I don't want you to think it's a slight against you, Dan. Like, I really do love both those films a lot, and Chinatown just, for me, blew me away in ways I didn't expect. But I love that you picked that as your favorite, though, because I think these are definitively the top two. But Chad, why don't you reveal your number one just so we can finish this out?
Yeah, my number one is Chinatown. I just think that movie's so great. I think it has a potential to keep getting better and better for me and growing on me. And The Godfather 2 as well. But in another thought, a lot of the times I'm like, The Godfather 1 to me is so perfect of a movie. I wouldn't even be mad if the other two movies didn't exist at all, because I don't think it needs them. And I think that's the thing with sequels, though, is because, like, well,
no sequels are really needed, but some are just better than others. Yeah, but like, I get what you're saying. Yeah. I just personally, I'm not that far on that train. Like, I definitely still love this one and think it should exist. But
I'm not saying it shouldn't. I'm saying, like, if it didn't, I wouldn't like complain. Like, I don't love it on that level, but I still put it as my number 2 because I was like, and let me say, I really liked the conversation a lot. So that's even saying that The Godfather Part 2 is like still there. Like, the status of it, I know, is like incredible, and it's just one that should be lauded. And we just saw Dan do it for a second time because he loves it so much, and so many people do. Yeah. And it is one of the greatest films of all time. I understand that. Just for me, I just think, like, watching it, I'm like 3.5 hours, but it probably will grow on me. It's only my second time watching it too. So, we'll see.
Yeah. And I want to say we'll still be able to give Godfather 2 more prizes, and I think we will in just a sec. But because of our rankings, because Chad and I both had a number 1 and Dan had a number 2, by 1 point higher, Chinatown is our best picture of 1974. I'm so sorry, Dan, but I do think it is a great film, and we did give Godfather the 1972 prize, and I think it's just fitting that Godfather's there somewhere, and I'm happy we did it, because I know Dan thought I was going to pick Cabaret over Godfather, but I would never do that. Just like, but then again, I picked another film over Godfather too. But Dan, I want to start with you because I want you to get the ground now running for Best Actress. We'll start with you because you have first for Actress. Why don't you tell us who's your Best Actress of 1974?
There wasn't as many choices for Best Actress, so I kind of didn't have to choose from very many. But the one who was actually in 2 of these films, to me, seems like the most obvious one for me to pick. And as a film of film noir, you got to love the femme fatale. And one of the best femme fatales in the history of film is Faye Dunaway. Despite what anybody might think of her during the Moonlight, La La Land situation, she was a great actress, and she was in the middle of a great run of films in her career at this point. The networks and just obviously Chinatown and Towering Inferno out this year, but she was on a run like nobody. Mommy Dearest in 1981 or 80 or something like. Before Bonnie and Clyde. She had about a 10-year run where she was just in hit after hit after hit. But I loved her as the main character in the femme fatale in Chinatown, and with the fact that she's also in Towering Inferno, that just kind of put her over the top as the choice here for me. And I love her as an actress, so good. I'm glad to have had an opportunity to pick her.
So I'm up next, and this is tough because I think she was probably all of our like top actress of the time, at least mine as well. So I'm gonna go for my backup, and I'm happy to get my backup because I think she's someone I've seen in a lot of other things, but never at this caliber, and that is Valerie Perrine in Lenny. I think she's phenomenal in this. I think, you know, she's, like I said, I grew up watching her in Superman, but I never really saw her as a dramatic actress. And in this, she's just so good at being just like that kind of heart that you need when Lenny is so down in the dumps and so like unlikable. She's really the heart that makes you realize why we should be invested. And I think the best films are those that can find a problematic or unlikable character and still make their story engaging. And it's kind of like Godfather 2 as well. You still feel endeared to the story, even though Michael Corleone is a jerk. And I think this is another example of Lenny being a jerk, but she's the reason why you're so captivated too. And I love her moments, especially in the documentary bits, you know, where she's recounting all the incidents and stuff like that. Like I think she's just really, really good as Honey Bruce. And love her in Superman. Love it. All right, Chad, you've got the third pick. So I don't know if we've taken yours or if your backup is still up.
You guys took two of my backups and left my favorite one that I was like, I was like, there's no way she's gonna still be there when it got to me. It's Diane Keaton from Godfather Part II.
Wow.
Yeah, no, she was my first choice. And then I had Faye from Chinatown, and then I had Dylan's pick as third. But yeah, Diane, I don't know. Even just like, I mean, I don't even think she's like in it that much or anything, but like, you know, the scenes that she's in, you know, that just those like little parts with, you know, telling him that, you know, she killed his son or daughter, whatever, a child, through abortion, you know, like that's such a hard thing for like a woman to have to go through, and just to see like, you know, why she did it in this way, because, you know, she's like, I'm afraid for my life, I'm afraid for my children's life and my future potential child's life, so why even have the child, you know, because of what you're doing to this family. And then to see her get shut out with the door, and, you know, just being like betrayed and defeated that way by Michael, when, you know, like she could have just left, and like, you know, he kind of pulled her in the previous movie and stuff like that. So I don't know, I saw a lot of like parallels with her and like Skylar White, and that's one of my favorite shows of all time is Breaking Bad. So, you know, I identified with her a lot, and you know, I just think she's fantastic in both movies, but, you know, I think a lot more kind of actually in the sequel here.
Cool. Yeah. All right. And then Chad, you get the first pick for Best Actor, so we can keep going along. And I think I might know where you're going with this, but I don't know.
I don't know if you do. Maybe I'm gonna do it. I thought about this. I'm gonna add someone else into the Picture This Hall of Fame. Jack Nicholson.
Yes. All right. That was my pick as well. So I'm glad you did.
And that is the reason why I did this is because he's picked twice, once also by me in Cuckoo's Nest.
The very next year.
So there you go. So I was like, you know what? And it's not just because of that. It's because he earned it. When I first started watching Chinatown, I was like, here we go. Jack Nicholson being the crazy Jack Nicholson that he always is. It never changes. Is he even really that good of an actor? Because he's always plays the same thing, and the Shining is the same crazy character. He starts that movie out crazy, so you don't even see that much character development for Jack Torrance. I see why Stephen King's mad about that, but then I just keep seeing him in this role as that character. He's there's something with these noir films where the main character is the only one that can like go and solve the case, but they're also kind of assholes, and they're just like they're just like the worst. And like
They're
he's
also
like,
us. We're
yeah,
we're kind of seeing the movie through that main guy.
Mhm.
yeah, and you're sitting there, yeah, because he's like around the water cooler telling these like awful jokes and stuff that you're like, come on, really? Like that's kind of like like a Trump joke, like something that's like, oh, boys will be boys, and it's like, no, that's not okay. That's not an okay joke. But but you still like this character. He's still endearing in a way, even though he is flawed and stuff like that. So yeah, and the way he performs with getting his nose cut and stuff, like I was like, is that real? Because that looks so real.
You
And,
convinced
like,
it, yeah.
there's the makeup, but then there's also his acting, and I don't know, he's just incredible in that movie. And I really like I said, I started the movie out not thinking he was going to be that good in it, and then he sold me, and I was like, okay, yeah, he's great. He's so confident in that role, and I loved him in it.
Yeah. So moving on to me for best actor, this is tough because there's so many to choose from, and I thought about a lot of the supporting performers. There was another one from Chinatown that I was considering, but he's just not a big enough part for me to have it over one of these other ones. And then I went to Godfather Part II, which just has so many great performances in it, and I'm gonna go with one, not because like I do think Jack Nicholson's the best actor of this bunch, but I do think this guy, the character, is so iconic. And I know this person's been awarded before in Picture This. This character's been awarded before in Picture This, but I still love this character, and I have never awarded him. And do you remember, Chad, when you awarded Jack Nicholson in 1975? You remember who I awarded 1975 for
Yes,
Dog Day
yeah,
Afternoon?
yeah.
I'm gonna do the same thing here. I'm gonna give it to Al Pacino for Godfather Part II. I just think we gave it to him last month. I think it was Dan who gave it to him, but I think he takes what the first one. It's a totally different character. I mean, he's starting from a totally different place. It's a totally different arc, and I think it's even more convincing, even more heartbreaking. I think it's even more criminal that he didn't win. I would have loved to see Jack Nicholson win for this, and I haven't seen Harry and Tonto, so I don't know. Maybe Dan can speak on it, but the fact that they didn't award him twice now for an Oscar is crazy. That we had to wait all the way till Scent of a Woman to get him an Oscar when he literally does Godfather, Godfather 2, and Dog Day Afternoon in the span of 4 years, and they don't give him it at all. And Serpico as well. Yeah, it's just nuts. Like, he's so good. I considered his co-star John Cazale, but just because I don't know how many other times I'm gonna have to award him, but
He's so good.
because there's only one more.
He should have been that supporting performance over Fred Astaire, I think.
Yeah, but he's only got one more chance to award him with Deer Hunter because that's the last film he does before he passes away. But we missed out on him for Dog Day, Godfather, and Conversation, and Godfather Part II now. But I do think still Pacino is the best performance in that film for me. Dan, who is your best actor though? Nicholson and Pacino are off the board, but you still have a plethora to choose from. I think I might know where you're going, but I'd love to find out.
Well, let me preface this whole thing by saying this. Okay, Art Carney, I saw Harry and Tonto, right? And this is my rant that I've been waiting for a month to do. And these guys knew about this going into it because we talked about this month. And I thought Harry and Tonto was a good movie. It is not a bad movie, and Art Carney's good in it. But Murder on the Orient Express with Albert Finney as Hercule Poirot is atrocious. I mean, atrocious. That had no business being nominated for anything. I mean, I cannot believe that is Chad and Dylan could do a better job of playing Hercule Poirot than Albert Finney did in that movie. That he was awful. That was the word. That was such.
I can't grow the mustache though, so I don't know if I can do it.
I couldn't believe how bad that was. How does Gene Hackman not get in there? How does other people? Gene Hackman, how does he not get married for Young Frankenstein? How does he not get nominated for The Conversation? How does Gene Hackman not get nominated for anything? It's ridiculous to me. And then you get Harry and Art Carney wins over Dustin Hoffman, Jack Nicholson. I mean, Al Pacino. Art Carney beats Al Pacino, Dustin Hoffman, and Jack Nicholson. It's like, what world am I living in here? What were they thinking? What were they on in 1974? I mean, this is ridiculous. And then Gene Hackman's not even in that bunch at all. You know what I mean? Gene Wilder is not in that bunch at all. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But with all that said, and like I said, I love Gene Hackman. And if you want me on again for 1971, I'll come on again for 1971. I don't care. But I'm going to do what you guys did.
Picking your actor you picked in 1980?
Bingo.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Vito Corleone, Vito Andolini, Vito Corleone, whatever. I mean, if you look at De Niro's career, he's got these larger than life characters, you know, in Raging Bull, in Taxi Driver, you know, but he's so subtle. He's so nuanced. And the hand gestures, I mean, he's just so different as Vito. But he also encapsulates this man who's completely different than Michael. That dichotomy of being completely different, and he had to be completely different. And, you know, I could not pick him, even though I freaking love Gene Hackman in both.
Stacked year for actors. I agree.
I mean, but I had to go with Robert De Niro, and he's my number one actor of all time. He's my favorite actor. Of course, I was going to go with Robert De Niro.
Of course.
So, he's my second. And Jack is in my top 5.
He got that voice down. I was like, oh, he sounds like how Vito would have sounded back then. It's perfect.
Yeah. So to recap our great year of 1974, and despite how we feel about which won or what didn't, all the films got represented except for Towering Inferno and The Conversation in our awards. But
Godfather Part 2 won the big award. So.
Oh, it won the actual Oscar. So that's something. Yeah, this is just a little web show. Who cares about us? Even though the subscribers are growing and keep growing them, 1,000 subscriptions, I will be roasted. Not in a literal sense, in a comedic sense. I'm not going to be set on fire. Yeah, no, this is not Hereditary. All right, so our best actors, Chad's best actor is I'm reading my own. My best actor for 1974, Al Pacino for The Godfather Part II. Chad's best actor, Jack Nicholson for Chinatown. Dan's best actor, Robert De Niro for The Godfather Part II. My best actress, Valerie Perrine for Lenny. Chad's best actress, Diane Keaton for The Godfather Part II. And Dan's best actress, Faye Dunaway for Chinatown. And our best picture for 1974 is Chinatown, with a very strong second place, Godfather Part II. I will say that because it is, you know, I do feel bad, Dan, but I also know that, you know, we did give Godfather the win. So 1 out of 2, you know, and Chinatown's great. We all love it still. So
no, you don't have to defend it. You don't have to defend your choice, Dylan.
You're a guest.
You have to live with it. You got to live with it. It's going to be on the live. It's going to be live. Everybody's going to hear it.
You have to go to sleep at night, Dylan.
Well, I'm not sleeping tonight.
Be able to?
I'm going to have to stay up for 24 hours now. Oh boy.
True.
That's
right. That's right. You can't sleep for a while now, but yeah, that's what I love about Picture This.
I do
this
too.
Was how we conceptualized it from the beginning is what won, what should have won. And a lot of people would probably disagree with us here. And when we gave Shakespeare in Love the big award. And I don't know, there's a lot of kind of hot takes where we've been like, no, we kind of like this one. Like we didn't agree with Raging Bull, but that's in a top 100s all over the place. But it's for sometimes we're just we like this other one a little bit more. But
it's all about what Chad. It's all about what resonates with you more. And I resonated more, even though I absolutely love Chinatown. I've seen it dozens of times.
We believe
I resonate more with The Godfather and the dichotomy and the juxtaposition between the two main characters on either side of that, and some of the decisions both players made, and the filmmaking style and blah blah blah. We could be here all day. We don't want to be here all day. Nope. It's already 2 hours and 37 minutes we've been here today.
Well, we got to wrap it up by 2:45, but we're staying on schedule though. This is perfect. I allotted 2 hours and 45 minutes for this, so this is working out beautifully. This is our first big test because this is our first long form video in the subathon. But Also worth noting, we do have some Hall of Famery. Diane Keaton was in the Hall of Fame last month for Godfather, but because she gets another, we're going to name that she has 3 now. Annie Hall, The Godfather, and Godfather Part II. She's now a 3-peater. Same as Al Pacino. He was inducted last month, but he does get his 3rd here. Dog Day Afternoon,
Yep.
Godfather, Godfather Part II. And we have 2 new inductees. Jack Nicholson, who won for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and now Chinatown, and both awarded by Chad. And Robert De Niro joins our Hall of Fame, having won for Raging Bull and for Godfather Part 2, both chosen by Dan. So we're giving love to the actors we love a lot, but there's a reason we love them a lot, and there's a reason the Academy loves them a lot. And we still have a lot more opportunities to give a lot more awards to a lot of different people, including Gene Hackman, Dustin Hoffman, all these people. Dustin Hoffman, we haven't even talked about his 2 Oscar-winning movies yet, Kramer vs. Kramer and Rain Man, which we will get to at some point. But yes, next month, because we still have to tease next month, is a big one because it is the Oscars of 2023, which is very, very, very exciting, where we will be discussing, Chad and I will be discussing the 10 films nominated for Best Picture in depth, and let me just rattle them off right now.
For the year of 2022.
For the year of 2022. Sorry, yes. I can see if you're watching this 3 years from now, you're probably like, what? Yeah. So, in alphabetical order, I'm going to try this on the fly. All Quiet on the Western Front, Avatar: The Way of Water, The Banshees of Inisherin, Elvis,
Yes,
Everything Everywhere All at Once, The Fabelmans, Tar, Top Gun Maverick, Triangle of Sadness, Women Talking. I did it. All right, there it is. So those are your 10 that we'll be talking about next month, and we'll be talking about Ceremony and all that jazz as well. Not all that jazz, not the Fosse film, but all of that stuff. I can't use that expression anymore. And then later on the subathon, Dan and I are just going to be talking about general Oscar stuff tomorrow morning, actually. So almost 24 hours from now. But we'll be talking just general Oscar stuff for a little while, just talking about maybe some where we're at right now and predicting the winners before we get BAFTA and SAG and all that stuff. I believe DGA might be happening tonight. The subathon, so we might react to it live, because that'll tell a lot about the director race for sure, and that's one of the most up in the air races right now. But I'm excited to talk to you about that, Dan. But where can they find you otherwise? I know it's right there below your name now that StreamYard has this cool feature, but please tell us, Dan, where else can they find you if they wanted even more of you than this 2 hours and 45 minutes?
Yeah, 2 hours and 45 minutes is a lot of me, but
you never know. They might want 24 hours of you, Dan. Maybe you should do a subathon.
Yeah.
Kidding. Everyone's gonna hate me by the end of this.
From disappointmentmedia.com as one of the sites that I write for, obviously from thefourthrow.com. Also, I do Gone with the Wind, which these guys have been on there with. It's on the Take 3 YouTube channel where we talk about award shows and whatnot. Also, my name or on Letterboxd or From the Fourth Row on Letterboxd or Dan Skipbound on Twitter, Facebook, Letterboxd, Instagram, those places. I'm all over social media, so you should be able to find me. But hopefully I'll be back here in April with these guys.
And Chad, where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of know if you watch the show regularly, but if not, if you're watching new for like the subathon and stuff like that, thank you for watching. Please subscribe. Excuse me, what the subathon is for. That would be fantastic. There's a lot of great content at the Dill Pickle Movie Network. But because of having Dan on, I just wanted to say thank you to Dan, because Dan is the person, for being on the show and being such a great guest, but also for helping me in my journey to trying to get more film critic-y kind of a deal, because Dan is a legitimate film critic, and I am trying to hone my craft about reviewing. I used to just do mostly just letterbox stuff, and I still plan to do that, but I started my own blog and over at wordpress.com, and so it's Clear Eyes Full Heart Reviews.wordpress.com. Excuse me. My plan for that is to basically review everything that I see that's new, everything I play. So, I threw up my first thoughts of Hogwarts Legacy. I did Sundance, and I was doing reviews for everything I saw there. So as I continue, and it might get a little less, when I have a baby, but I'm still gonna try to get those reviews out and crank them out, and yeah. So please check out that blog, and maybe follow me over there and see what I got to say. Also check out my YouTube channel, Chadwick Webb, where we rank things. We did most recently a big Disney animation ranking where we did all 61 Disney animated films. It took like 5.5 hours. But it was very fun. It was a big task. It was great. Please check that out. Like and subscribe to that channel. We're gonna do the MCU Phase 4 soon, so look forward to that. A very divisive phase, so we're gonna have some arguments probably, but we'll see. And then check out they're over at the Nerd Entertainment Network on YouTube. Welcome to Prime Time. My buddy Hunter and my wife Carrie and we all talk about horror stuff. Sometimes we rank Buffy episodes. We have a lot of fun over there. We play games, stuff like that. So check that out. And yep, nope, that's it. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, so I'm still going to be here when this ends because that's how this thing works, so that's going to be kind of crazy. Right up next is the Paddington 2 watch-along, so if you want to watch along, get in that chat, turn on your... I don't think it's streaming, I'm so sorry, but a lot of you have it owned anyway, so if you have the Blu-ray, pop it in. If not, you'll hear me just fawning over something that you can't watch, but it's okay. I will try to explain best to you what I'm seeing. But later on, we have some Marvel's trivia, we have a draft day, and then later on, we have a Twilight episode of Frame Wreck coming. We got more trivia, and then tomorrow I'll be talking with Dan some more with Oscar stuff. Talking with Zach with some Big Brother stuff, and we're gonna keep growing these subscribers. And if time allows, at the end we'll play some games as well. So thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you. We'll see these guys sooner, later. I think Chad, you'll be back for draft day in a few hours, and you'll see me in like 30 seconds. So enjoy this outro, and thank you guys so much.